There is one human quality that I believe all of us should have: curiosity, the desire to know the world better, the desire to engage. If you're not curious about the world and our fellow humans, we might as well be the walking dead. And you'd imagine that one profession that curiosity is perfect for, one profession that surely draws curious people, is journalism. The dharma of a journalist is surely to try and seek the truth about the world, to peel off one layer at a time till we get closer to understanding the true nature of things. And yet, in my time in journalism, I found few people like this. More than 90% of the people, just as in any other profession, were just going through the motions, ticking boxes, uncurious about the terrible beauty around them. That's why it filled me with energy to speak to my guest today. She's been a journalist for 3 decades, but she's never allowed herself to be jaded. She looks at the world through fresh eyes, chases big stories, runs after deep truths, and doesn't care about mundane matters like career and so on. She's written a wonderful book recently and is constantly busy doing so many things. And she reminded me that without this lust for life, there can be no meaning.
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen, our weekly podcast on economics, politics, and behavioral science. Please welcome your host, Amit Verma.
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen. My guest today is Malini Goyal, a veteran journalist who's done much acclaimed work for Economic Times and India Today and is known for her deep dive stories and massive features. Malini's also recently co-written a wonderful book called Unboxing Bengaluru, a fine work that works at multiple levels. At one level, it is a history of Bengaluru. In fact, many histories in different overlapping time frames. At another level, it's a portrait of a society in flux as young people struggle to adapt their desires to both a globalized world and a local churn. It also contains many portraits of Indians of different types, young people from small towns figuring out life and companionship, migrants trying to build a home, even visionaries trying to look to the future while the past still lives around them and drags them down. This book contains multitudes, including a fascinating look at what Tinder data reveals about young people in Delhi, Mumbai and Bangalore. There's much to dig into, but first, let's take a quick commercial break. Hey, the music started and this sounds like a commercial, but it isn't. It's a plea from me to check out my latest labor of love, a YouTube show I am co-hosting with my good friend, the brilliant Ajay Shah. We've called it Everything is Everything. Every week, we'll speak for about an hour on things we care about, from the profound to the profane, from the exalted to the everyday. We range widely across subjects and we bring multiple frames with which we try to understand the world. Please join us on our journey and please support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Amit Verma, AMITVARMA. The show is called Everything is Everything. Please do check it out. Malini, welcome to The Seen and the Unseen.
Lovely to be here, Amit. Look forward to this conversation.
Yeah, and you were just telling me a horrifying story just before we begin of how you once lost your notebook when you were in Israel. And for a journalist to lose a notebook with contacts and all of that is absolutely frightening. And tell me a little bit more about the sort of tools that you have used in your life which meant something to you from the time you started doing what you're doing.
I think notebook and pen, it's something that I'll always have. And pen, not an expensive one, never an expensive one. That if I lose them, it's okay. And a couple of pens. So notebook and pen are always there. And I always number my notebooks, always. And there are keywords that I put on the notebook. So for example, it's Israel. So Israel will be written on the notebook somewhere prominently, so that if I have to refer sometime later. So there was a time that I had hundreds of notebooks that I had collected and through many, many years. And then often there are themes, right? So as a journalist, what I did, sometime around 2008-10, I began, every year I would pick a theme that I would want to focus on, right? And then, for example, if jobs is the theme that I want to focus on that year. This is besides many other sort of themes that I'm chasing that year. So there would be a series of books on jobs. Jobs 1, Jobs 2, Jobs 3, like that. And then there would be other normal notebooks. And there would be I would have a content page. So where interviews would be sort of named, like number 1 interview is X and then Y and then Z, right? Like that. So that helped. And whenever you wanted to go back to a particular conversation, even at some point of time, right, you want to refer to that. That would be very powerful.
So you have all these notebooks collected over the years with you?
No, when I changed home, I threw many. Then when I came to from Delhi to Bangalore, I threw many. India Today onwards, I was in India. I joined India Today in 1999, and from then onwards, I had kept many books, notebooks. But slowly, I had to get rid of some because it was just like too much to handle.
Was it heartbreaking letting them go?
So, when people say that like they are saving their jewelry and they are precious and all that, for me, these were the jewelry and these were the precious stuff. I'm not very fond of jewelry, right? So these were the kind of precious things I was like nurturing, saving, all that. So it was very, very hard. I'm not a throwaway person. I'm not a use and throw person. So anything and everything in my life, they'll stay till the time. I just can't sort of hold on to them because there is no space or there is whatever reasons that I need to get rid of it. So it was very, very hard, very hard. One didn't know what to throw, what not to throw.
I remember when I was in the 8th standard once, we shifted houses. And as we shifted houses, my mother threw away all my notebooks from class 1 to 7. And I was distraught. I missed them so much. Like I cried and cried because, and for, now looking back on it, it is absurd, but they had that kind of value for me. And over the years, I've come to exactly the same approach that, you just described, that you'll have a cheap pen and if you lose it, you'll take another one and it doesn't matter. And it's kind of like that with me where I love my gadgets a lot because they help me do my work, but they're all replaceable, and all the really valuable stuff I would imagine is now in the cloud or it's in your head and etc etc. But I'm struck that well into the last decade you mentioned you were still physically writing with pen and paper on notebooks and you hadn't shifted.
I still do.
Okay.
I still do. And I always have a notebook and pen. In fact, throughout my book journey, I would have had 40, 50 odd notebooks, all of them numbered. And even when I was recording, I was taking notes. And I think it's also a more efficient way for me to go back to the conversation, because often what happens when you are recording, everything gets in, right? But when you are taking notes, there are highlights, right, which you want to sort of preserve, which you want to focus on. And that helped. That's one. Two, I think when you have so much notes, it's just easier to catalog, easier to go back to, just flip through. And I have used it quite well. And in fact, during the book journey, I also did video recording, right? I have never gone back to those video recordings. They are there. But most of the interviews, actually, I did video recording, I did audio recording, and I did the notebook. It was just backup. So that, right? But nothing compares to notebook, I think. There are things I'm noting down on the top, on the side, right? Oh, this point is important for that chapter. That will also come at some point of time. So all that is very, very easy to do in notebooks.
Yeah, there is the decision of what do I note down out of the,
Yes.
in the flow of language. I remember, I've been also a journalist for a very long time, though not as long as you, but for about a decade I was. And I remember at one point for Cricinfo, circa 2003, 2004, I was just casually chatting at the nets of a match I had gone to cover with I.S. Bindra. And he was so great that at the end of it, I said that, is this all off the record or can I quote you? And he said, no, of course you can quote me. So I went back and I had to reconstruct the whole thing from memory. And I managed to do that. And I now realize that because I didn't have a notebook, my brain was just holding on to, it was breaking it down to what are the essential things I need to remember and just remembering them in a sharp way. In fact, I'll link that piece from the show notes, because in that piece, dear listener, this was circa 2004, so well before IPL or anything. He told me that, I have this young friend, Lalit Modi, and he wants to do a league and the league will look like this and all of that, well before IPL or ICL. And that was quite fascinating. But the other thing I wanted to ask you about is reading your book. I was firstly, of course, delighted by all the human stories in there, and you clearly spoke to so many people for this. Many of your interviews must have lasted hours, and you just had to pick out 2-3 lines, and that's all that we get in the book. And I was wondering, and I've been thinking about it for a while, that back in the day, it was necessary in some senses, if you're having 10, 20-hour conversations, to distill little bits, because, what are you going to do with all those conversations? And in that sense, curators of content like us are required. in the modern times, I also often wish that writers who are, collecting all of this material would also, as long as it's on the record and they're not breaching confidentiality, also just dump it all online, because there must be so much there that you are unable to use, because within the book, there's a particular narrative you're following and you have to follow that particular arc. But just these kinds of people speaking to you for so many hours, like I'm sure many times during your career it must have struck you that, wow, what a great conversation. It's such a pity that I have to write an 800-word article or whatever.
Totally.
So
Same here, Amit. Even during the book journey, there have been some meetings, some people I've met 3, 4, 5 times. And some conversations were so personal, so deeply personal that, first meeting was only about just getting to know, right? Then you open a little, then you open another, a little bit more. And then you want to have a deeper level conversation. And that only required a certain trust building before you could do that. And I let that happen. I didn't want to force myself to have that conversation in the first, second round. One has to earn the trust. And that definitely is the case. And in fact, let me give you an example. So, there was this chapter, there's this chapter called Startup Couples. And it's a chapter close to my heart because I wanted to understand through these couples how the dynamics within the marriage, if marriage as an institution is evolving in any interesting and significant way. I would have spoken to 8 to 10 couples at least and spent a lot of time, like half a day or over 2, 3 meetings or 4 meetings and multiple conversations. And I only used, I think, 4 or 5. That's it. At least 5 to 6 or 5 to 10, I would have just not pursued any further, right? And I had to take that hard decision. And I had to bring in the generational shift. I had to bring in different kinds of couples and different challenges that they were. Now, all that is sitting, right? At some point of time, I would love to, that raw sort of footage, as you would call it, in the print, right? At somewhere, but maybe I've just gotten so sucked into a range of other projects that we are working on. In fact, I have not had the time to soak in the joy or find that relish that the book is out. This work that I was working on, this book that I was working on for 3, 4 years is out. I haven't had that moment to sit with myself, to relish it. At some point of time, I want to do that, but by and by, as days goes by, it's just like, okay, kitab to aa gaya, ab aage badho. Aisa, to, in November 17th, when we released the book, we were also preparing for our festival, and we only had 3 months last year to do it. So even the day the book was getting released, the person, Ravi Chandar, who is kind of the festival director,
he's been on this show as well.
He told me, Malini, अब काम जो है ना फेस्टिवल का करना है. मैंने कहा, रवि, आज के दिन छोड़ दीजिए, उसके बाद हम लोग बात करें. So the bottom line is that I didn't get time to sort of sit back and sort of enjoy that journey. So that's a regret, but I think it's good to move on, right? And find other projects, interesting projects that you can immerse yourself deeply in.
I think my lesson from all these years of working and sort of the approach I get to what I do is that I never look back, in the sense that I'm always engrossed in the process, right? So I'm recording with you now. Between my last recording and this has my full attention. And the moment this is over, I will completely forget about it till the time for release comes, when I listen to it once, make the show notes, and completely forget about it. So today on Twitter, various people are praising the episode I just put out, which, as it happens, is with Ira Pandeyji. And I've actually literally forgotten the contents of the episode. I've moved on. And at one level, I understand that having written a book over so many years, you deserve that moment of basking in the joy of having done it and all of that. But equally, I think that for people who are productive and who found a good process that works for them and who found happiness in that process, I think that's just the way it is. You're always, your mind has moved on, you're on at the next thing.
That's true, Ramit. Even for the magazine writing that I did, right? So that way people call me that I'm very structured, very methodical in how I looked at it. So I would at a time work on 3 to 4 stories of pipeline of stories at different stages of execution. Typically one story would require 4 to 5 weeks of turnaround. But that's the only way you can do deep stories and churn out story every week, right? So I would do that. And बट जब कहानी ख़त्म होती थी, जब स्टोरी आ जाता था, like typically Friday would be the day. Friday morning I would turn in the copy and Saturday it goes, right? And I would feel like when you see off the bride, right? वो विदाई जो होती है, वो जो घर में माहौल होता है ना, a mini feeling of that I would get, oh, this story is out. Now Monday is the new start, right? And I would get that feeling because
every Friday you would feel that way.
Yeah, every Friday whenever I was working on a big story, right? And whenever, especially the big story where you have put your heart and soul and you worked for weeks on it, I would get that. And what was very good that I liked is that, even over 25 years, I could find stories that still excited me, right? Where I still felt anxious कि ये क्या मतलब सही होएगा नहीं होएगा. What would be the reaction of my either the boss, the editor, or like what would people react to, readers react to? I think those were the things that makes a creator always maintain edge and also your creative instinct. I think those were important things for me as a journalist to sort of try. And I always moved from one story to another, one sector to another. So I'm not one of those beat reporters that auto 20 years and I'm happy. I just get bored very easily. So if I'm doing auto for some time, I'll just deliberately not do. Even if my boss is saying auto stories are well read, we need this. So I'll come back to it. But then I'll develop something else which is totally new and I know nothing about it. And the kind of joy I get in like immersing myself in something new and learning from scratch, I think it's a different kind of accomplishment and adventure that a journalist sort of enjoys.
Yeah, and I wonder about how you keep that joy alive. Like what I have tried to, like I've been working since 95, right? So what I always find in all the professions where I have been is that there are a really small percentage of people who are really involved every single day. And a lot of people just go through the motions, they're filing what they have to file or they're shooting what they have to shoot or, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just maybe 5% of the people who are always involved and, keeping the joy alive. Like for me, that joy is certainly alive in this particular show because I bring it out myself and the feedback is very intense. Every week I hear from people and etc., and that keeps it going. But I remember in my time in journalism, often you would do these stories and there would be that instant feedback would not be there. You would simply not know. Your story would disappear into the world and you would hear nothing of it, especially pre-social media. You hear nothing of it and you keep doing story after story like that. And it can also, lull you towards that sense of complacence where you're just going through the motions and all of that. And I'm imagining that you were never in danger of that because your character trait is just to be excited about what you're doing, right?
Totally. So one, as I mentioned, I was not somebody who would do one sector and then stay at it. And my expanse, the areas that I would look at is totally all kinds. And I like things at the intersection of society, business, economy, consumer, and it meant enormous possibilities. Let me give you some examples. Like once there was this trip to Alang, okay? It's Asia's largest shipbreaking yard. Now, some people would say, kahan jana hai shipbreaking? I was like excited. I hadn't ever been to a place like that. And just to see what that place meant, kind of a graveyard for the ship, right? And the kind of people, the kind of conversation. So reporters came back. They wrote their spot stories. I came back and wrote a story on Alang. And I brought back many numbers surreptitiously, right? Speaking to guards, speaking to workers on the dock. You can only have in presence of whatever people. I came back and then I called them for more candid conversation. And those conversations are far more deep, right? Those workers could tell me stories that they could not tell me in front of people. And that was a powerful story, to be able to understand a place. You can't imagine Alang unless and until you go there. It's like a graveyard. And then when I came back and wrote that story, I loved what I was able to do and my own experience of it. I remember, there was something happening. I think Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg was doing philanthropy. I saw many Indian entrepreneurs were doing philanthropy. And one of the things that occurred to me is the markers of being wealthy is shifting. What people are doing with their money is changing in India. It was happening globally, right? And I wanted to explore. So it's the personal curiosity, the hunger and the curiosity together would. So I began reading about it. And thankfully, in internet era, you can read everything. You can read latest research happening at Harvard, Stanford, all that. And I would just immerse myself reading about it. What does being wealthy, markers of being wealthy in today's world? And once there is enough meat one has gathered, then I start doing the reporting. So like my theory is kind of that my premise is being confirmed by some of these researchers in the global sort of where it's appearing. And then I began to do conversations within India with some of the entrepreneurs that I knew. It was very, very interesting, how these rich looked at their wealth and what it meant to be rich for them, and how they were looking at their wealth, their relationship with it, and what they were doing with it. Was an interesting way to sort of dive into it. So, you found stories like that. And this also meant two things. One, I was learning something new. And two, I was not competing with anybody. These were the stories it wouldn't occur to anybody to write. These were complex, layered stories to do. And there were times that there were areas that I was intimidated by. Let me give you that example. So around 2014, elections were happening, right? And I didn't understand social media. I'm not that social media person. I wasn't that social media person. So I would watch people be a fly on the wall, but nothing more than that. I thought if I'm good at work, my work should speak for myself and not, I didn't need to go market myself on social media. That was the thought that I had. And that meant that I didn't understand the beast at that point of time. But there was a desire to understand the beast because elections were getting shaped by social media. And I decided to dive deep into it. So I did a cover story for Economic Times at that point of time that the top social media political leaders in the world, okay? And then I sort of collaborated with a firm based in Singapore. It's a social media, it's an analytics firm, right? And we worked together to carve out personalities of top leaders in the world. What they did with on their social media platforms, who they followed, who were following them, the engagement level. So we put together a range of indices on which we vetted them, and we together worked on it. Now, in the beginning, I was very candid, right? I told this person with whom I was working that I know nothing about it. You are expert, and we'll do this journey together. So once you admit to yourself and to the person in front that you don't know anything, so there's no need to pretend, right? And that takes away a lot of anxiety, right? And then we are starting from scratch. At the end of it, well, I understood social media very well. And then he was telling me, Malini, this story that you wrote, it didn't even feel like you didn't know the social media at all. And that's the approach probably has also helped. That areas I didn't understand, but that I felt the need to understand, I would just decide to do a story. And through that journey, it was also a learning curve and getting over that fear that, "Arey, mere kuch aata nahi hai isme."
Early in your book, you wrote, quote, "There is a certain journalistic thrill in immersing oneself into something unfamiliar and then writing about it," stop quote. And I would guess that is, therefore, in a sense, what is essential about your work, that you like to do a deep dive into something that is interesting and you know nothing about, and you come out at the other side clothed in all the layers that you've just traveled through. I guess that would kind of be it.
That's who I am, actually. Multiple stories. I remember 2006-07. You were asking me how do you keep your sort of excitement alive. So Let me take you to that era. So I had come back from US, and Economic Times had hired me at that point of time, and I was heading a section, career and business life. But within 1 year, I got very bored. I had a team that I was steering. I had a section that I was leading, but the work didn't excite me because it were daily copies, and daily copies were like, you didn't have much time to process them. After 1 year, I was just so bored. I didn't feel like going back to work. So I sat down with my editor and I said that, I want to move out of this. He said, what happened? And I told him I'm not enjoying the work. And he said, but this is the only way that you go up the hierarchy. I said, what is the point of heading wherever you are headed if you don't enjoy the journey? I would like to enjoy the journey as much as the destination. So he tried to persuade me out of it, but I said, no, for me that is important if I'm not enjoying. So he said, what do you want to do then? I said, maybe I'll become a reporter or a writer at large, or whatever you want to call it. It didn't matter. So, not having that hang-up that so many people reported to me, I headed that section. The bottom line for me was, did I enjoy the work? Did I look forward to going back to office next day? That I prioritized over everything else, right? At that time, people may have thought that mera dimag kharab ho gaya hai, but totally the best decision I would have made at that point of time. And after that, when I became just a reporter, this is 2006-07, I began doing stories I wanted to do with a hunger that I couldn't let out for a while. So I did one 4-part series on India's liberalization children. They were turning 18, so it must be 2008. And I looked at this generation through multiple lenses as consumer, at the kind of psychographics, the kind of attitudinal shifts that may have happened in the 18 years, the kind of workers these people will be at workplace. And through multiple lenses, I loved that. And thankfully, we were in an era where India was boom, boom. So Economic Times had pages, and I would get one whole page to write one sort of part of the series, right? And I did. So it was great. Around the same time, I did a 3 or 4 part series on Hyderabad city. I had never been to that city, okay? And I decided that Hyderabad is making headlines. Chandrababu Naidu has taken it to another place. I was just curious. What has he done to that city? I would love to know. And I had no reference point. And I decided to immerse myself in Hyderabad. So I traveled to Hyderabad and just did a 4-part series. And again, looking at the city through multiple lenses, through political infrastructure lens, through corporate lens, through how the city's socio-economic, cultural sort of change shifts are happening because of this growth. I totally loved that. And when you immerse yourself in completely new area, I think the fear that people have, and which I also have, is that you'll get things wrong, right? So the strategy that I deploy is I go with a very open mind and as a cub reporter. I'm not here as a journalist with 20 years experience, 15 years experience. I come as somebody who knows nothing, and I do a lot of groundwork. So maybe South Africa might be a good example to give you. So when I was at Forbes in 2010, I got an assignment to do a special country report on South Africa. I knew nothing about it. For 2 months, I put Google Alert on South Africa. I began reading on South Africa. I began talking to people remotely on South Africa for 2 months, right? That was my preparation. When I landed in South Africa for 15 days for my reporting, I probably already had a certain structure to the entire sort of report that I wanted to write. Reporting was only reinforcement and confirmation of premises that I had built through my research and reporting, right? Through my research and reading and some conversation that I had done on phone. And many things, what you realize that during virtual reporting, reading, you would have picked up, and then you realize when you go there, they're wrong. assumptions are wrong, premises are wrong, and you should be willing to revisit them. But there are things you realize that again and again, somebody is talking about it. It's coming up in conversation and it's getting reinforced. And you realize those trends that you picked up are probably right. And that's how I think it's easier to sort of get into unfamiliar territory and then try to sort of own it after some time and write about it authoritatively. I think that's one thing that I've learned over the years.
There's this great phrase I picked up called Gilman Amnesia. Have you heard of it?
No.
So this is Michael Crichton narrated this anecdote about his friend Murray Gell-Mann, the great physicist. And Gell-Mann told him that, look, whenever I read something in the newspaper which is on a subject I know deeply, like physics, for example, I know is bullshit. But I trust the newspaper for everything else which I know nothing about. And he said that's a kind of amnesia, and as Gell-Mann amnesia, which Michael Crichton kind of warned about. And here I see that there is a problem that journalists cannot escape, that whenever you're writing about something, you are necessarily a generalist to begin with, right? So especially when you are deep diving into a new subject, you're necessarily a generalist. And what has happened with the blogging age is that all the specialists now have the means of production and they are actually online. So you also have the actual experts to compete with in a sense. But as a journalist, you face the incredibly difficult task of making that subject vivid for the general reader without making any of the basic errors which will make the expert jump on you and say, hey, you know nothing. You know, the Murray Gell-Mann kind of observation. And I wonder how you navigated that, because in other media, like when I wasn't journalisting, if I was blogging or whatever, it's easy to put an eye on that and, okay, I am sharing my journey learning about something, and then even if I make any mistakes, the reader accounts for it and it's fine. But as a journalist, at one level, you are the voice of authority. And at another level, like you said, you're also aware of your own sort of the impossibility of becoming an expert in 4 weeks or whatever it is. So how did you tackle that? Like, were there times where it was particularly difficult? Were there times where even experts came out and said, like, you know, you did such a great job explaining that to the general public? How did you tackle that?
There were plenty of occasions where I felt very challenged. In fact, every story that I did on a new area, I thought, मेरे से नहीं होएगा at the beginning. And then what I would start with is just read whatever you can on the web. That's one. Two, being a journalist, you can reach out to anybody and everybody, all the experts, and let them do the talking and you listen. It requires a lot of hard work if you are the kind of journalist who want to immerse in new areas. So first few conversations that I would have had with these experts, they would have thought, she was stupid. She doesn't know anything. She doesn't even know how to question. And I was okay with that. What I was doing is I was trying to understand different layers that made that subject or made that space that I was trying to. So first few 7-8 conversations would be like that. But they were enough to warm me up as well to the space, right? Then after that, many times I would go back to the same person. I had some few additional questions. Can we do a round 2 of the conversation? And we would do round 2. We would do round 3. And by the round 4, probably we understood we had a certain equation. And he also understood I was not that reporter who did round 1 and who sounded stupid and thought she had done the job. So that was one. Second thing was that what is good is when you are a generalist and you have views of multiple sectors, the way you can connect the dots. It's a very, very big advantage, big edge that rarely people will have. The way one can... Let me give you one example. So automobile is a heavily tracked sector, right? There are auto reporters, auto editors who have done that forever. Right. You can't compete with them. So I always tell them that I'm not car enthusiast who can tell you that torque, power, this, that. I'm not that person. I look at auto industry at a very structural level with its forward and backward linkages and what it means to the economy, to the job market, to the manufacturing sector. That's what I'm interested in. So I knew what I was looking at. So I'm not the person you would want to talk to if you are looking at, ye gaadi kharidne ya wo gaadi kharid. I'm not. But globally, I tracked the industry very closely. So one, I kept a a sense of a very macro perspective of how this space is shaping up, either in China or in the US or in Japan. So that gave me an enormous global perspective, which is not every auto journalist would look at. They would look at more here and now. They are busy with daily reporting. Remember that. And I remember doing a story when Maruti 800 was turning 25 or 30, some such thing, I forget now. And I decided to do a story. It was again a cover story, a cover for Economic Times. The journey of Maruti 800, and I parallel it with journey of India and journey of Indian consumers and how they had evolved together. And how Maruti 800 exemplified how India has evolved. And Maruti 800 being phased out was a certain reflection of an inflection point in India's consumer aspirations, India's evolution, right? And its economic and consumer evolution. Now that story, I don't think auto reporters would have written. They would never write. It's what I brought to the table, right? Because I understood India's consumers. I understood India's macroeconomy. And I spoke to a whole lot of people, not just auto industry, but consumer behavior, people who understood the economy. And that's how I think I would have differentiated myself, I guess.
No, well said. And you pointed out about how, first interview, second interview, third interview, fourth interview, etc., etc. And the thought that strikes me is that, in a sense, you'd be a bit of an outlier in journalism simply because the way journalism has certainly become now. Most people don't have the luxury of doing a story over 3 weeks, 4 weeks, with ET, with that particular, the kind of stories that you were doing. You had that luxury. And I guess in Forbes being a magazine, obviously, it's you get more time. But a lot of journalists I speak to today feel incredibly frustrated because everything is daily. They're expected to give something every day or 2 stories a day, and there's no time for depth. There's no time to enter a rabbit hole. One day you're covering this beat, another day you're covering something else. In fact, editors bemoan to me that beat journalists have just vanished from the scene, no more budgets, etc., etc. And my thinking there is that if you are turning in a story every day, as opposed to you're turning in one story every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, the kind of thinking that is required is so incredibly different that you're actually producing a different kind of person. Like a Malini who does daily stories every day for a year is actually really different from a Malini who does, one story every week and has the time to sink in and do interview 1, 2, 3, 4 and all of that. So tell me a little bit about that. Like on one hand, of course, as you point out, that 2006 incident where you tell your editor, I can't do this anymore. I need to actually write and be a reporter. But also in a sense, I'm guessing they're a long form reporter, these long features, the kind of stories you've been describing. But had that option not been open to you, had you had to go back and do the regular kind of daily, semi-daily kind of reportage, I'm guessing that it would have been so much at odds with your temperament that you might just have left, right?
Totally. I don't think I'm that person. I'm not that person who can do a breaking news story and enjoy it. I remember actually in 1999, I did join Reuters. I had 2 offers, one from India Today, one from Reuters. And Reuters' salary was 50% higher than what India Today was offering. And I was a young person, young reporter, where money mattered, right? And I took up the Reuters job, much against my internal wish at that point of time. And money and working for a sort of global agency was 2 important drivers. Within 1 week, I had told my boss at Reuters that I can't stay here. I'm leaving. Within 1 week, I realized that's not the place I can ever bring joy to my work life, right? That also meant taking a 50% cut to go to India Today, but I've never regretted it. It was probably the best decision of my career. India Today was like going through a ringer at that point of time. This is 99. It was at a different place, and I learned so much at India Today. And so yes, you are right that, and I've always been a deep dive journalist, thankfully, and deliberately. I don't think I would be a good person in a daily reporting thing. Second thing is, I think being planned and being structured also helped. Many times 1 week is not enough to churn out an in-depth story, right? I mean, 2 days to लिखने में लग जाता है. Uske baad you want to do first draft, second draft, third draft sometimes, and you don't have the time, or even on a weekly. So I would work on very long cycles. So my editors typically knew that I have 3-4 stories already approved, ideas approved, and there are different stages of execution. And sometimes they would come back and say, Malini, this week I don't have this. Would you be able to prioritize that one that you discussed? And I would be able to. But I would parallelly sort of process multiple stories, right? That was one important thing. Like many of the collab work, like I was telling you about that social media story, I would have taken like 4 to 8 weeks. You work with this outside agency, they themselves will take 2 weeks to turn it around. And then you have engaged in the conversation 2 months before, actually, when that conversation first began, they started working on. So working on a lead time and not working on breaking news story, those were very, very important things that I was not chasing breaking news ever. Very rarely. Only sometimes, like editors would say, Acha, ye wala breaking news hai, why don't you do something? And one would do because one understood that space, so it was easier to churn. But one wouldn't get as much joy in writing those pieces as much as, what you've worked so hard over 4, 5, 8 weeks to be able to churn out. Yeah.
At one level, I think both you and I are on the same page that most of the joy is in the doing. You're just diving deep into something and you're doing it, and that's pleasurable for its own sake. But at the same time, we're only human, and you sometimes want acclaim for the work you've done, or if you work really hard on something, you spend 8 weeks working on something, you want to hear back from people how great it was, and you want it to sort of be remembered, right? And one of my sort of observations about, either the journalism I did or I have written columns for pretty much all the Indian outlets, including ET for a while. I had a column on poker with Economic Times, which ran for a couple of years. And my sense with all of that work, every little bit of it, is that it just gets lost. Like that whole metaphor that one day you're a newspaper on someone's breakfast table and a week later Pani Puri is being wrapped into you. And that's exactly right for the way that I think about it, that stories come and they kind of vanish. Whereas other things, not just the podcast, but even the blogging or the newslettering or whatever, it just feels that it lasts a bit longer. You hear much more from people and all of that. So was there ever that kind of sense that you've spent years and years going really deep into different things and you might feel that, my God, what an amazing job I did, and then suddenly some random other 600-word shallow piece of thing is going viral on Twitter while you are like, my God, I wrote the ultimate thing, what is this shit, life isn't fair. So
Yeah, it has happened so many times that this rich and the markers of being rich, it was a story I was very, very passionate about. And I spent a lot of time and my heart was in it, trying to explore as a researcher, ki ho kya raha hai yahan pe. And, editor also, theek hai, chala gaya. There was no feedback. And the story sank. And many stories would sink and it was okay. But, a special story needs a special attention. And when it doesn't get it, it just goes, right? So then you are a little heartbroken. But the important thing is, what you said, you just look ahead, you move on. And you don't even have the time, right? It appears on Sunday. Monday, you are on another story, right? But there are times that somebody will remember you and especially seek you out to tell you, that story that you did was so good. And especially what they would come and tell me is that, for example, cars pe, often I was told that, that story, I don't think even auto reporters would have got it. That got me a particular joy because you've entered into it as a newcomer, right? And I always saw myself as somebody outsider looking into a space. I remember a story I did on different species in India's corporate jungle, okay? So how American companies are, how European companies are, how Japanese companies are, Chinese companies, Korean companies, and Indian companies, right? They all have a very different, distinct culture and how you're supposed to behave. The bosses there have behaved very differently. And over the years, I had looked at them, I'd seen how they behaved. The customs, the office traditions were very, very different. Even the hierarchy, the way they shaped and they manifested. So I did that story, that the different species in India's corporate jungle, and outlining what a typical American multinational would be like, what a typical European multinational would be like, and then Korean and Chinese and Japanese and Indian. Wow. And it was fascinating for me to sort of unearth some of those things. Now, they give you special joy, right? When somebody writes to you that, Malini, maza aa gaya padh ke, wo samajh mein aa raha hai what you have written. But this is where a reporter with experience will be able to bring depth, right? Insight, perspective, depth that otherwise would be difficult. And I think as a journalist, one has to play to one's strength. And these were the strengths that I brought to the table for the paper.
I'm imagining that in a sense, like one, I love your description of yourself as an outsider looking in. That's how I kind of look at everything. And whenever I enter into any kind of subject, I feel that I have some natural advantage because I'm going in there in a very interdisciplinary way. I'm not looking at it in the cliched way that someone who's been in that silo all their life would have been. And in your case, I would imagine that the insights you would have gotten into our changing society would be far deeper than anyone just covering society or covering culture or covering any one of these beats. Because in a sense, there's that old parable about the blind man and the elephant, and you're actually looking at the elephant from so many different angles. So can you share with me some of the things you learned about our society and our changing country which surprised you at the time? Like in Markers of Wealth, for example, I imagine,
Liberalization children was an eye-opener for me because as you grow, your peer level is very different, right? You understand what your peers are going through, similar age group. You don't know what 18 years are going through. So when I did that liberalization children, and these are 18-year-old, what they're expecting out of life, what their love life, their drivers, their passion, what money meant to them, what success meant to them. Just unearthing all that, it gave me fantastic insights. And it allowed me also to talk to people who were in touch with that generation, right? People, consumer behavior, people like Santosh Desai, marketers who keep a pulse on it, from MTV executives to a range of people. And being a journalist, you can virtually call anybody. And that's probably an advantage not many people have. And I would use that advantage. And not just in India. I've often tapped what I see, because I was there in pre-internet era, right? When we struggled for basic information, all that. In internet era, the joy of just looking up and finding out who is an expert on Gen Z, who is an expert on intergenerational shifts that are happening globally, reading about what's happening in the West or what's happening in the East, in Japan or China. Those are things that you enrich your perspective in. And India could be very, very different, right? But just getting a global sense of what's happening to this generation globally gives you a certain worldview in which you contextualize what's happening in India, right? So I looked at India's job market for over 2 decades, right? And it's an area very close to my heart. India's employability crisis, India's unemployment problem, all that. And I also looked at global, right? What's happening in Japan, what's happening in China, just out of sheer interest. It would enrich my story often, but so I remember once I did this conversation, ऐसे मजे में, I got experts in Japan and China. And we were doing a conversation on what's going on in Japan, what's going on in China. And this was Mercer, so global HR consulting firm, right? So their partners their executives in China and Japan, they got onto a call and we did that conversation. I told them that I don't know what will come out of this conversation, but I wanted to understand it. It was interesting, right? Sorry, I forgot what the question that you had asked.
All of this is part of that answer. I mean, I was interested in knowing what kind of unusual learnings you came across in this journey.
So I'll tell you. So here, this conversation was happening, and one thing I learned. So, as a young girl, as a woman, I thought that as the country grows and evolves and develops, the status of women will automatically change, right? Japan surprised me, shocked me. Japan, one of the most developed, most successful, economically developed country, and the status of women at workforce disappointed me. And that was a time that I rethought my premise that, it's not necessary that a country evolves and economically develops and progresses and women are beneficiaries of it. It doesn't. I think it is closely linked to the cultural sort of aspect rather than economic aspect. And Japan is a great example of that. In contrast, China is very different. China's workforce participation of women is pretty high. What women are able to do in China are much, much at a higher order than, say, even Japan. And what's happening in India with women and women at work, right? It saddens me. Like, countries progressing, but women aren't able to sort of have the kind of progress that they can. So some of these things you begin to sort of unearth that you could not otherwise. And having a global perspective on anything also gives you a better sense of how a particular subject or a particular issue that you are vetting. And women at work is something that now, if you look at globally, there are many countries which are very poor, but women are doing very well. India is closer to what Gulf countries or Arab countries are, or what even Afghanistan, etc., is on women workforce participation. So these are some of the things when I bring in to some of the reportage that I'm doing, because I already know that it's not economic progress. If we are betting on that, economic progress hai, but uske alawa, there would be many other things that need to happen for a woman's position in the society or at work to change or to evolve.
Yeah, I've done many episodes on this with the likes of Namita Bhandare and Shreyana Bhattacharya, and it's so multifactorial and complex. And one of the things I realize is that many of the truths about this country are so counterintuitive that even after you know this is true, you're like, you can't figure out why. Like Japan, for example, what you just told me is surprising to me. And did you hypothesize about the why? Like why is that the case?
It's a very traditional, very feudal society.
But why would it get worse with wealth?
With women?
Yeah.
Things haven't changed for women. That's the better way to put it, right? That's a better way to put it.
Worse, yeah.
Things haven't changed for women as much as it has changed for the country from an economic standpoint, right? That's what it is.
So let me take you now a little further back into your journey. Tell me about your childhood. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? What were your early years like?
So childhood actually really feels like another world that I can't even conjure what that world was. And I was born in a very, very small town in Bihar called Munger. Okay, Mungeri Lal ke Haseen Sapne, okay, that one. So, and I grew up in a very conservative Baniya family where girls didn't work. If they at all got educated, they got educated for the heck of it. And my mom got married at the age of 15, 16 when she wanted to. And she was from Bengal, right? So she was very hungry to study, and she could not. And we are 5 sisters. And you know the reason why we are 5 sisters, okay? Yeah. So this was a typical conservative Baniya family where girls were supposed to be in a specific role, right? And but it was an idyllic childhood. It was another era, 70s. My grandmom and grandparents, it was a large house, always full of people. There was no chase in life, no dream in life, right? Just life went by and you enjoyed it. And some of the things that I remember as I look back is probably I was very tomboyish, and I was a rebel in some sense because simply I didn't like many of the things. My grandmom was a matriarch, right, and who would have a say in the house. So, लड़कियों को ये नहीं करना है, तो मेरे को तो वही करना है. Girls shouldn't climb trees. I have to climb trees. Girls shouldn't have short hair. Girls shouldn't wear pants. Girls shouldn't do this. And my counter was that I'll do everything that they're not supposed to do. So I'm sure I was tough for my parents to bring up from that point of view. So that was one thing that I remember. And I also in grade 4, my parents shifted me to a convent. Okay, it was probably the best school in the town, right? Much against my grandmom said, इसको convent में डाल के दिमाग खराब हो जाएगा, लड़कियां बर्बाद हो जाएगी, this that. So, but my parents thankfully had only daughters. So there was no discrimination. All of us were daughters. All of us were equally treated. And that, I think, as I look back, was a good thing to have happened, right? And my mom was absolutely very, very clear that all of you will study. You have to stand on your own feet. That was very, very clear. But the childhood was, we would steal guavas from neighbor's garden and do things like, kabaddi khelna in the narrow alley. But this was a very, very full house. There were always visitors coming, visitors going. We didn't know who was part of family, who was not. Second cousin, third cousin, all kinds of people. So that was quite nice, actually. And there was so much joy in doing small things in that world. Simple thing like going and plucking guavas from the garden. We had a huge garden at the back of the house that we would. And small achievements also felt so big. And I remember that in that small town, girls were hardly seen in the public spaces, right? Thoda bahut, but not that much. It was also not safer, right? Remember, this was 70s, early 80s was also the Lalu Yadav era, right? So law and order was getting worse and worse. So I remember my grandfather got us a cycle. And right now you think about it, it sounds bizarre. But learning to ride a cycle and going around in that small little town, you could get spotted. So we were the first girls to ride cycle in public, right? And people would know that this one's daughter is riding cycle. Then we slowly graduated to moped. Then again you got spotted. And what was good was that because we started, many others kind of joined, right? And it was easier for others to get win that battle. And then I remember I was riding a scooter as well after that. I'm sure I must be a bit underage. I don't know. We can edit that out. Whatever. So bit by bit, and those felt like big battles that you are winning. When I first rode that cycle, the liberation I felt, I don't think I can feel that liberation again. It was so nice to just go on your cycle in the public space and do that. And I remember, I must be 10, 12, whatever. And jab barish hoti thi na, at that point of time, I would go and tell my mom that this is something I need to buy urgently for tomorrow's school. And my mom couldn't stop me. And I was this person who would love to get wet in the rain and ride my cycle to that shop, pick it up and come back. So I was that person. And these were interesting sort of journey in that small town, right? Every small little win, right now it looks like really bizarre. But those were very important wins at that point of time for me.
Doesn't look bizarre at all. I did an episode with Shelly Chopra where she spoke about how for her riding a motorcycle in college was so empowering and, just changed the confidence with which she sort of looked at the world. So in these early days, in riding cycles in the rain and so on and so forth, how did you see yourself? Like, what were your dreams for yourself? How did you see yourself? Were you someone who was also reading? How did you look at the world and your space in it?
So, you know what? In my house, there was no books, okay? It was a business family. So, books had very little space. But I think going to a convent changed a lot of things for me. And I remember I had a class friend, and his dad was a PhD from IIT, and I went to his place and I saw a room full of books. And I was jealous, man. Wow, what kind of house he has that, and his dad is so erudite, and you can sit down and have a conversation. So in that place, I met finding role models, finding people who could help set aspirations was hard to find. But I do also recall myself as somebody looking for that role model. So, this friend's father was a kind of person, and he was like known for stickler, high integrity in ethics. He was a professor in college, and only if 2 students came, he started his class on time. He didn't bother. He was that kind of. And I said, what kind of man he is? And I would look up to him. I remember when I joined in grade 4, Notre Dame, and that's where I studied, I was this outsider looking in, right, in a very different way. It was a very new world, right? And virtually who is who of this society then, right? The professional class, the administrative class, and there was an ITC factory, there was a railway factory, and many of those kids sort of came to that school. And I came from a very non-illustrious sort of family from that point of view, and I knew nothing. So, and I was also coming from a largely Hindi medium, right? So I remember a first time our teacher told us that there will be a quiz tomorrow. I didn't know what quiz was, okay? The word quiz didn't even register. मेरे को लगा कुछ बोला होगा उसने. Next day was test and I flunked and I got 0. And that was the first time I failed in an exam. And after that, I've never failed. I've only excelled after that because I decided that ये अभी दोबारा नहीं होएगा. And then had to work hard at it. And from being this outsider, but always hungry and curious, I think those were the two tools that worked a lot for me. So I would just observe, be an observer, and understand their world space, right? What world they belong to, what world they came from. Those were important things for me to be an observer. And of course, remember, you're a child, right? So you don't even have the confidence. You have your own set of complexes. You are insecure. You don't want to say something and become a fool about, everybody's making fun of. So you want to be quiet, but you want to observe. So that was something that I think has stayed with me all my life. In fact, all my life, I think I felt like this outsider trying to get in. And then the moment I'm an insider in that space, I want to be an outsider in another space, right? And also that was one time I remember that, in childhood, things happen to you and how deeply it shapes you. So I have this voice which is a little screechy, a little high pitch, right? And in school, grade 4, grade 5, all these boys would tease me, right? Every time I would speak, they would mimic, they would imitate. And it reached a stage that I would hate speaking amongst people because I was scared of these people mimicking me in front of everybody and making fun of it, okay? And this lasted for a very long time for me in the sense that there were, it's 4-5 years back, I was at a stage where I would hesitate speaking or voicing myself in a public fora, right? Because that complex had got seated so deep and one doesn't realize it. And I deliberately 3-4 years back when I did my podcast, my biggest agenda was to get over this complex, get over this fear, right? That your voice is your voice, right? You don't have to be ashamed, embarrassed or whatever, and just be confidently able to deal with it. So in the school, some of these things happened, right? But also the school offered me a world which was so far away from what my home world was about. It was the first place where girls were positively discriminated. So girls' fee was lower than the boys' fee. It brought special joy. And the school also taught that girls and boys were equal. Right? It was my first exposure to the fact that girls and boys can be equal, which is in contrast to the society I was living in. And that also set me on a path to question a lot of things I was seeing around. Maybe it's caste. I remember one of my aunt, she eloped with a Brahmin boy. And I must be like 8, 9, I forget the age, but and he was a professor in the college. So the day she eloped, there was this, all the elders are sitting in the house and there is a kind of mourning, right? Matam mana hua hai. Kya ho gaya? Naam kharab ho gaya and this, that. And as I said, I can speak up. So I told my dad, what is the problem? What are you guys sort of worrying about? So she ran away with somebody she loved. You guys don't have to even give a dowry. And the boy is well placed. He's a professor in a college. What is the problem? And I was just shut up and my mom was told, please take her away. But some of these things, I can only look in flashback and think that school instilled some of these things, right? Because around me, there was caste, rigid sort of boundaries that were being set, either as a girl, as a part of community, etc. And they were important foundational pillars on which I think I built myself. But coming to the question of dreams, I don't think I had any dream. Nothing. It was just living year day to day. But the only thing that I think my mom was pushing us for is that you have to study and you have to excel. And there were times that I would get 99 on 100, and my mom's question was, where did one go? Not even like you are the topper, you are the 99 on 100. No. So I think that also rubbed off a bit, that, you don't get complacent. And she was a hard taskmaster. My mom really made our life miserable at that point of time, but thank God she did. She pushed us hard, and at a point of time that I could have just let it be. We could have just been like any other girl, got married and, had children like that. The toughest phase I remember when I was in grade 11th, and our school was till 10th, convent. And 11th, 12th, almost all my classmates went to Delhi, went here, went there. And my parents said, no, you are not supposed to go. And I had got in those days, I think it was 88. So DPS RK Puram, where a lot of my friends had gone, and I wanted to. And my mom said, no, you can't go. So I had to actually move from a convent to a college there. This is 86, yes. And it's a Bihar board, right? And for me, it was a dramatic shift in culture, everything. And this is co-ed college, okay? And co-ed college, we were 3 girls and everybody boy. All rest were boys, right? And safety was an issue. And you dressed like as poorly, as badly as you could possibly. And for me, it was major adjustment. And I remember I'm this tomboyish girl wanting to ride cycle, and I had to collect myself and be as not noticeable as possible. And I remember that period was very difficult, 86 to 88. But final year, when I was to appear for my 12th exam, I decided actually that I'll move to a girls' college at that point of time. The reason being that boys' college, there was a lot of cheating, a lot of this, that, jo mere vash ka nahi tha. So I moved to a girls' college and appeared for my exam there. Thankfully, I had a university position, despite the fact that I had nothing else. And I think that was my lottery at that point of time for an escape from that small little town that I grew up in. My parents were still not convinced at that point of time that I should come to Delhi. And it was a big battle for me to fight. And so I told them eventually that either I'm studying in Delhi or I'm not studying at all. You can do what you want with my life, right? And my parents had their concerns. Ladki ko itna dur kaise bhejenge? Ye hoga, wo hoga. And we had no relatives at that point of time in Delhi. So it was a new sort of world. At that point of time, my cousin sister was there. And so thankfully she was there. So then I came. I fought that battle and they said, okay, jao, jo karna hai karo. So I came to Delhi. It was 89. I must be 18 years of age. And that was the beginning of a new journey for me. I got admission in IP college, and I would have gotten admission in other places, but because IP college had hostel, it was important for me. Otherwise, my parents wouldn't have allowed me to stay. So I stayed in the hostel, and again, I was this outsider looking in. In my first year, I remember it was a 3-seater and 3 girls. One girl is from Woodstock, Missouri. One girl is from Wellams, Dehradun. And another one girl, this is me, is from this small town, Bihar, right? You don't know how to speak in English properly. You don't even have the dress that is required. You don't know the lingo. You don't know nothing, right? And then to adjust to that world. It was a huge adjustment. But what I think when you come from that background is that I think you have enormous grit and determination and enormous hunger to do well, right, to get ahead. So what I didn't have, I compensated for my academic excellence, right? And that, I think, stood by all through my 3 years. So again, I was the class topper. And interestingly, in 11th and 12th, I had taken science, right? And I wanted to get into the army. And don't ask why I wanted. I just wanted, I thought it was aspirational. And girls typically didn't get it. They were not allowed in the army except for AFMC, right? So I wanted to get into AFMC and get into the army. So AFMC mein hua nahi, only 20 seats. So when I didn't get in there, so I asked people, what should I do? And everybody said, you are so good in academics, you should do UPSC. I have zero idea what UPSC is. Okay. So, but everybody said, you are good at studies, so UPSC is your thing. So I said, okay. So what do I do for UPSC? They said, history le lo. So I'm in Delhi. I have nobody. And some of these friends from earlier era, Nottingham, they are there. They told me, Malini, history le lo. So I said, okay, history le liya. First month in college, and from science to history, and I was very good in science. And I realized I'm stuck. I hated it. And the way they teach history is, not that inspiring as well in college. And I just didn't like it. But I also realized that if I have to make my stay here work, I have to make this work. I think... particularly because now I have a 24-year-old, I can just sort of contrast that with this, that, our generation grew up with making the most of what you've got. We are the children of scarcity, the era of scarcity. And the ability to make the most of what you've got is also an enormous ability. That you don't look at what you don't have. You just look at what you've got on your plate and just try to enjoy that and make the most of it. So that's something I decided that, okay, अब history करना है तो अच्छे से करना है, because I don't want my parents to feel disappointed. So I remember actually in first year, I got a second division. This was the first time that I got second division. I was class topper with second division. History, you don't get too much marks. So my mom came to Delhi and I told her that I'm class topper and I've got 58 or 59, some such percentage. He said, don't fool me. And you think 58, 59 can be a class top? I had to actually take her to my HOD. And who told her that, no, actually she's done well. So then my parents were convinced that she's not faffing around. She's not just fooling around, but she's studying and all that. But this was also an era that my parents back home were going through a difficult phase because... again, as I was saying, that this was also the Lalu Yadav era, right? RJT era. And businessmen there were going through a very rough patch. And my dad was going through a rough patch. Once he was bombed, once his shop was robbed, and once he got a ransom letter that you come with whatever amount, otherwise consequences are from anything to anything, including raping your daughter, right? These were very, very difficult times. And I remember one by one, my sisters, I brought them to Delhi. Okay. My elder sister, who is elder, but she's more the compliant one, okay? Because she's the eldest. And I'm the one who said, okay, she'll not get married right now and she will study. So that person. Then I brought her. Then one by one, all of my four sisters, that is, we came to Delhi. I got them admitted in schools in Delhi at that point of time. My parents were back in Bihar, and that was an interesting era, in the sense I was in college and I was doing this. So I remember I'd taken my sister for admission to, I think, Convent of Jesus Mary's. That's a school in Delhi, and we both are sitting, me and my youngest sister. And I must be looking like school student only. I was very frail and thin and stuff. And they said, they confused me for the student. And I was in college final year or something. So, but because we as sisters were so tight in our bonds that it was such a fantastic place to be in, caring for your sister, being their local guardian, sort of supporting them in whatever way. But it also meant that you matured much before your age, right? Because, she's going through her heartaches, and forget your own heartaches. I mean, it's her heartache which gets priority over yours, right? So those 3-4 years were about sort of all that, my own personal transitions. But I think as I look back, those 3 years in IP college were probably the fantastic year of my life. It brought me to another world. It showed me many worlds that could exist outside of my little place in Bihar. It was also the place that I learned to dream, okay? And Delhi is also a place where you learn to be like, fight. It's an aggressive place, right? And to survive, you have to learn to fight. And that place taught me that as well. In many ways, this reset, this transformation, I think I would give Delhi a lot of credit for to opening up possibilities for me at that point of time. So, okay, I never gave UPSC. By the final year, I realized UPSC is not meant for me. But what? But I wanted to go. I applied for UCLA. I applied overseas for studies, and I got admission in UCLA. This is master's first year. And I told my parents that I want to go, and they said, you should get married and go. I said, are you mad? Get married and go do my master's in the US? So this is, by that time it was 93 or something. And so I decided that I'm not going. And UCLA, I would have needed some financial support from my parents before I went. So against it. But what I was very clear is that before I got married, I wanted to be on my own feet. So when people were thinking they want to be X, Y, Z, my only sole agenda was that I want to be financially independent before I got married. And then, sometimes serendipity happens. Sometimes luck sort of favors you. And it happened, right? In January 94 summer, I was graduating for my master's, right? I was finishing my master's and I didn't know what I was going to do. And in January, a bunch of friends were applying for this Times Center for Media Studies and Diploma in Business Journalism. I had zero idea about journalism. I had zero idea about what business journalism was. Apply kar diya. Last date. Everybody's applying. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. I typed out my resume right then and there, as everybody was, and I submitted it. I got no calls. And then I just called the director. So, those numbers are registered. So you picked up the number, the director himself picked up. And I said, I'd applied. I have not got any call. I just wanted to make sure that where I am. And luckily he says, well, I would love to meet you. So I said, okay, when can I come? And then he called me and he met me and he said, well, I'm good with your admission and I'll have to have Sanjay Baru. Okay. So if he agrees, then we'll take you in. So I met Sanjay Baru and they took me in. So this was a diploma in business journalism. This is January of 1994. And then after 3 months, 3 months was incubation period. The training period, on-job training, right? So option was Times of India and Economic Times. So मुझे समझ में नहीं आ रहा था कि Times of India करना है. I have no reference point, right? I've come from history, so right. So Economic Times is another world. But some of my friends said, no, this is 94, liberalization has happened. Business media is doing very well, and they said business journalism करने का है, Economic Times लेने का है. So I said okay. So I opted for Economic Times. I'm not somebody who easily gets daunted, you can make out. So even if I know nothing, I said, okay, I'll figure that out once I go. So I joined Economic Times. And they put me in corporate finance markets page. Okay? I have no idea, nothing. I don't know what's the difference between net profit and gross profit. I don't even know the financial year is different from calendar year, nothing. And this is pre-internet era where you can't even look up on the web. Treasury bills, bonds, interest rates, real interest rate, inflation, nothing. And, part of this corporate finance market page, and I have this boss, Chandy, and I ask him stupid questions. Ye kya hota hai, wo kya hota hai? But within 6 months, I was able to sort of measure up. And in quick time, I was able to sort of handle that section on my own, right? It was important journey. The moment I was able to handle all that, I wanted to write. I didn't know I was a writer, frankly. I didn't know writing was in me, but I thought I wanted to try my hand at it. And well, I began to write little things, and I enjoyed the process. I enjoyed reporting, writing. And corporate dossier was the place where, and remember, I was in corporate finance marketplace, so there was a direct linkage with corporate dossier. So I was understanding what was going on in the corporate world at that point of time. So I wanted to write and began, and my bosses there resisted me writing. They didn't like me writing. I mean, you are sub-editor, so you should do sub-editing, right? And you can't be writing. But for sections that I was writing, which is corporate dossier, they were delighted that, somebody not on the team writing prolifically and stuff. So there came a time that I asked my desk bosses to put me on permanent night shift. So 6 to 12 at night. And morning 10 to 6, I would do writing. And you are young, right? So you can work long hours and you can maintain that energy level. At least for 1 or 2 years, I did that, writing, working. And then it was, I really enjoyed writing, and I found my calling there. So eventually, I think they got bugged with me and they said, okay, jao tum. Corporate dossier mein likho. So I began to write for corporate dossier, and then the journey began with writing, and then it took me to another trajectory. But I do remember journalism in that era. I mean, I think it was also an era where people who got into journalism came from very privileged background, right? And I remember I still was not conversant, very fluent in English. There were words I would get like the accent wrong. I was very conscious of interviewing people in English and messing things up. Also, the fact that probably you may not be knowledgeable in that area sort of did weigh on your mind. Like you are interviewing somebody on a corporate thing, and abhi to pata nahi hai ki you yourself are in the depth of things or not, right? I think some of that definitely kind of weighed heavy on me at that point of time. I was very conscious, very insecure in my reporting process as a reporter. But I was a cub reporter, right? And even if I messed up, it's okay. I learn, right? And I'm sure I would have messed up things at that point of time. Thankfully, there were bosses. You would go back to, "Mujhe ye nahi samajh mein aa raha hai," "Yeah, I'm not able to get this. Can you explain?" Or if I messed up in my writing, they would fix things and stuff and tell me. And it was another era also where the editors were of a very different mindset, right? They would work with you, all that. And then India Today happened. It was a very different world. I'm going to pause. I think I'm continuing non-stop.
No, this is delightful, and I have so many things I want to double click on. And there are a couple of words which, for me, seem to sort of play such an important part in what you just described. You mentioned serendipity earlier. And even before that, I was thinking of how heartbreaking it is that if it was not for your good fortune in having a mother who wanted you to study, if it was not for the good fortune of having a convent where you were able to go, if it is not for the good fortune of, doing well in the university exams in 88, in getting admission into IP or whatever, if all of these events in a perfect storm don't line up and fall into place, you are not where you are. And there are so many millions of Malinis who are not where you are. And, that serendipity and that luck plays such a big part that it is almost heartbreaking. So, you use the word in the context of course, choosing to, in January 94, choosing to go for that. But it is really the whole game.
Yeah, so, when I came to Bangalore, many people asked me that, how would you stack up Delhi versus Bangalore, or what do you miss about Delhi? And I said, my first reaction was that, how a woman experiences the world is very different from how a man experiences the world, right? And for me, the biggest was that in this city, I could step out and walk in the dark alone and not have this stress, anxiety weigh on me, not looking over my shoulder, conscious of it. It's a big deal. I have not been able to do in Delhi, despite the fact I've grown older. I'm not a young girl anymore. I've lived in Delhi for 35 plus years, and yet there was this huge overhang in that city, right? In fact, I remember 2021, November, December, when I first, one of those first trips to Bangalore for the book. And I was to meet somebody, barely 10 minutes walk away, right? But I booked an Uber and I went, and I have terrible sense of direction, so मुझे पता नहीं चलता. So I just took an Uber and I went. It was just very close by. So when we wrapped up by 9, and it is dark, deserted stretch, right? Which I had to go back. So he said he's walking back his home, and it was for him also short hop, and for me it was like shitting bricks, man. That this deserted stretch, night, unfamiliar road. I know nobody here, and I'm going to walk, and I'm not getting Uber. I walked that day with a lot of stress and anxiety. It's been 3 years now. And this was the overhang of Delhi, right? In Delhi, I would never do that. I would take out my car, even if it's 5 minutes walk at night. And here I now routinely walk comfortably with no anxiety, no stress. So how a woman experiences a world is so different and so distinct. There are things that men may not often realize, and women internalize it so much that it's kind of muscle memory, right? So that happened. But you know what? If odds are stacked against you, I think you compensate it doubly by bringing in certain great determination, hunger. I don't think if I had a very accomplished sort of childhood, in the sense that everything was given to me on a platter, I would have this hunger, this determination, this grit to do things, right? And I can see that a lot of my friends whose parents were well placed, who got things on a platter. I remember 94, when I joined Economic Times, my sister was staying with me and she was in grade 11th. I had to prepare her breakfast, pack her lunch, and then she would come home, right? So we two were there. And then go to office and then do this double shift at some point of time, right? It was hard work. And they would tell me, Malini, तेरे itna kaam kyun karna hai? But the thing is, work was what I knew. And work was what I knew will make things work for me, because you have nothing else to fall back on. You don't have a dad to open doors for you. You don't, and then you don't distinguish yourself in any other way, right? So work is where you can excel. This is the easiest route to sort of up. So I think, when you don't have certain things, I think you compensate with other sets of things. And I would definitely look at things like that. What I didn't have, I compensated for the hunger, the curiosity, the grit, the determination, and those are important things. You don't get it easily. So I feel good that, you go through the grind, and only through the grind you learn the power of some of these things.
In fact, the second word that came to my mind was not a word you had used until then, but you've used it, I think, 5 times since, and it is so apt. And it is hunger. Like when you describe about, getting the director's number and calling him. And I thought, okay, if I am the director, I am admitting this person right away. Because it took the initiative to pick up the phone and make the call. And it doesn't matter what their level is right now, they will go far in life. Your story about getting all your sisters to Delhi and helping them study and helping them settle there. Your story about working that double shift. That hunger is a whole game. So I have another question. It strikes me that, in a sense, being an outsider looking in, actually, probably in one sense, while it made life much harder, in one sense, I'm imagining it gave you a certain advantage also, because you could see things other people couldn't. You had a broader vision. Like at one level, it is, of course, a negative. Like just as women have to carry this extra layer of awareness with them, I'm guessing as an outsider also, you see things which others take for granted. So it's totally a negative, but you can also use it for you, because then your approach to every story that you do, to everything that you read is, shaped by that. Would you say that's the case?
Totally, Amit. I think because you realize you have nothing to lean back on, right? You, like, appointments milna hai with a secretary. You don't know anybody who will open doors for you, especially in the 90s when you are like 2-3 years in the profession, right? Or in the corporate world, your dad isn't somebody's friend, right, who will open doors. So you know that you're not expecting anybody. You don't get complacent, and you know that you got to work hard to get things. I remember there was a comment that I needed from somebody who was a senior executive, I think at one of the corporate headquartered companies, company headquartered in Delhi. And this is pre-internet era, no cell phone, nothing. And I had to get his quote for a story that I was working on. I went and stood outside his home. कभी तो आएगा घर. और घर का एड्रेस जो है वो रजिस्टर्ड होता है. So I went and stood outside his home, and I got his comment because he arrived at some point of time in the evening. So this determination, this great hunger doesn't come easily, and I actually feel that it's an important skill to have, and it's hard to get many times when you are given things on a platter. So I had that huge advantage. I could work hard, and I'm also a very hard-working person, right? In the sense, I can take a rough and tumble. I used to go in buses. I didn't have a car or a apna vehicle. I didn't have that, right? And I could take buses, move around. But 90s were also a time not everybody had buses, right? So not everybody had cars. So totally right that it is an advantage. I actually see it as an advantage. In hindsight, it was totally an advantage if I look around. So when I remember when I joined Economic Times, I was really this outsider who knew nothing about anything in Delhi, who knew nobody in Delhi, and was starting from scratch. But also the thing is, I am not weighing down on anybody's expectations, right? My parents were just happy that, okay, Tika, she's on her own feet, blah, blah. And I was not being weighed down. Whatever I was doing was first time happening in the family, right? So there was joy from that point of view. Despite the fact initially my parents thought that, kya UPSC chhod ke you become journalist and this, that. So they were quite upset actually initially. But slowly they gave in and they said, no, it's okay. Whatever you decided to do, chase that. So you are neither also weighed down by your own expectations. So, when you have a certain dream that you've constructed for yourself, then you are on that specific chase. I had no specific chase. That meant it freed me in many ways. I could chase what I wanted to do at different points of time, and I was not hostage to it. And one of the other things that I realized as I look back is that I didn't develop these golden handcuffs that people develop, right, in their lives. That you can't do your life without X or Y or Z, the material things particularly. I'm not a very material person. I'm not a very consumptive person. So what dress I wore didn't matter that much even when I was young, right? How I looked, it didn't even matter that much. That meant that a lot of things that people spend their money on, I didn't drink, I didn't smoke. That meant I was not, and I didn't like eating out, which is very rare again for a young person. I like ghar ka khana. So all that meant I was able to conserve the limited amount of money one was making at that point of time. So I remember we invested in a house before we bought a car. Okay. And which is very rare. In a small journalist salary, how do you manage that? This is like 90s, huh? Very, very small salary. You could hardly get by. But we did that. Small seed money was paid for a house that we wanted to buy. So some of those very, very grounded middle class sort of approach to living life also liberated me in the sense I was not hostage to the things that everybody was hostage. Ki kaun sa night club mein jana hai, kya hai. But you can say the converse, that how did you enjoy life? How did you unwind life? I don't know. But for me, all these new things were joy. That, things, the stories that I was doing, the new world I was immersing in. For me, I was like a kid in a toy store, discovering, learning new things. And that's what brought me so much joy. That, books I could read, which I didn't have access to earlier, right? I didn't also have the time to do it. So, and in fact, now I reflect back, a lot of my reading was mostly non-fiction. And it was work, mostly work. So if I'm reading on wealth or doing a piece on wealth, I would read a book on the 21st century, the wealthy class or something like that. You would look up on the web and get that. You couldn't buy books, so there are Google books where you get the extract, at least one or two books. Or I went and read the interviews of those authors people who've interviewed the author, and you get a sense of the book, right? So some of those jugaad you would do to understand that space. And I actually truly enjoyed it, discovering these new spaces that I didn't know anything about.
What was the first, like, do you remember any memorable early stories? Because I imagine first you said you were a sub-editor, then they allow you to write, they allow you to report, but your long-form stories must still be way into the future.
Yeah.
So, are there any memorable stories that gave you that moment of pride ki, haan boss, this is it, I've done it, this is the thing?
Yeah, so I got an interview with Jack Welch. Story was not big,
My
okay?
God, wow.
So, interview was not a big deal, but getting an interview with Jack Welch in 97, 98, forget, in the 90s some year, and for a cub reporter, and this is the Jack Welch era, remember? He's the
Yeah.
big guy, globally time, and everybody's kind of celebrating him. He's the best CEO in the world and stuff, and then I got an interview with him. So that felt like, wow. And of course, inside you know that you don't have the confidence to go and interview. And thankfully, I had a lovely editor, Arindam Sen Gupta. He said, Mani, can I come along? He could have easily said, I know he was just trying to assuage my anxiety, saying, I'll come along and we'll do the interview together. But he was such a lovely editor. He asked, can I come along? And we together did the interview. Having him present in the interview made me so much more comfortable. But so in terms of getting a break like that, that felt like really nice. I think I was the last one to interview Dr. Parminder Singh of Ranbaxy before he passed away. And that story was a cover story on corporate dossier. And I wrote well. I mean, the bosses said it was a great story. And it felt good. But I can't remember what I wrote in that story. But anyway, that story stood out for them. India Today's first 6 months was every day I thought I'm going to resign.
Why?
So, at Corporate Dossier, I was a star reporter, okay, who was doing cover stories every other week. So my bosses put me on a pedestal and this, that. But inside I knew I can't be a star reporter at this age. I have a lot of learning to do. So if they are thinking that I'm a star reporter, something is wrong somewhere. So I wanted to try another world, right? So my son was born in 99, May. And I don't know how I got that guts. 99, September, October, or November, I joined India Today. Okay, my son is 6 months old. I should not have. If I was in my senses at that point of time, I should not have. But anyway, I joined. And here I come, and India Today is a completely another world. Here, my ideas were trashed, rubbished. My stories went through so many rewrites, I couldn't even recognize it. And I suddenly realized I'm so incompetent, inadequate. My writing needed so much rewriting. And there were times that I felt, mere se nahi hoega. But I had a wonderful editor, Rohit Saran, and he was like, Malini, it's okay. And then he'll sit down with me that this is what was not right. Like and India Today, the process of putting together the idea and submitting your idea pitch, right? That itself is a process that you would do a lot of hard work to submit your pitch in that meeting, Friday meeting, where all the editors are sitting and your idea will get trashed threadbare, right? They'll be discussed threadbare. So you don't want that to happen to you. So you'll research and come to a place where your hypothesis you've already come to, premise you've already arrived at. So you've done a lot of work before you even present your idea to the team. So having an editor who understood you and who worked with you to make you better, I don't think they make editors like that anymore. I was very, very lucky to have him. And so working after first 6 months, things began to settle down. You got a hang of it, right? How to do an idea, how to write a story. And of course, bit by bit, you only got better, right? And also remember that Corporate Dossier was a corporate focused, business focused. The readers were very different. India Today was like our moms should be able to read it. Making it lay person, the kind of themes you chase were very different. Macroeconomy, consumer, car story, but written not like a economic story, but a consumer story, right? B2C kind of pieces. So I learned, and those 5-6 years that I was at India Today was transformative. I think it laid the foundation for me, the kind of journalist eventually I evolved into, right? Hard work that went into writing, hard work that, and thinking about new ideas, how to approach it. It was a very, very important sort of stint for me from a learning standpoint. And I learned so much by just observing people, right? I remember Mr. Arun Puri, and he would ask such basic questions, right? आप मनी मन सोच रहे हो, अरे Mr. Puri doesn't even know this. But the moment he starts asking those basic questions, you realize half the people in the room don't know this. And he's asking very valid questions. While it may look dumb questions, but those were very important questions to be answered before putting anything on the cover of the magazine. And from that, I learned, Amit, that even if you sound stupid, ask those basic questions that you don't understand. कि क्या होएगा? लोग आपको stupid समझेंगे ना? It's okay. It's better to ask those stupid questions than make a fool of yourself. Or not even fool. I mean, ask. There's no shame in it. You don't know everything, and it's okay not to know everything, but there should be an intent to know whatever you are accomplishing. I think that was a very important and powerful learning for me. That best of people may not know everything, but ask. Don't be shy from asking those stupid questions as well. And there were many other things that I learned. Writing a B2C story, writing stories with so many layers, writing stories at the intersection of society, business, economy. Many of those things I learned in that place. Very, very formative. I don't think they make editors and workplaces like that anymore.
I'm kind of fascinated by the different ways in which one learns a craft like journalism. Like, one way of learning it is that you go to a big journalism school and you're reading all these models, and you're writing from when you're very young, you're an avid reader, you've got all of that. That's one way of kind of getting into it. You come with preconceptions, but you also come with a certain writing style, and etc., etc. And the other way is coming at it differently, much more like you did, that from the ground up, you are having to work hard and learn everything. How do you craft a sentence? How do you begin a story? How do you structure a story if it's 600 words, if it's 800 words, if it's 2000 words? How do you reach out for quotes? So take me through a bit of what that learning process of two aspects of journalism were: the craft and the values. Craft, of course, just in terms of, I'm guessing a lot of your earlier work would have been learning by doing again and again at the ET desk, and etc., etc. And also of values, because that is something which we are never taught explicitly in a sense. You kind of, get it from osmosis from whoever your mentors are. You mentioned you were lucky to have good mentors, but a lot of people aren't. Journalism is full of mediocrity, and it's full of people who just should not be editors but are. So what was that journey like for you of learning these different aspects?
So I'll first talk about just the values, right? As I was mentioning, I was not this person who hopped out, who enjoyed a 5-star meal at a conference, right? It was nothing for me. I would be as happy eating a roasted butta in the roadside, right? I'm that person. So some of those chases that people had, I didn't, thankfully have, for whatever reasons, right? Second was that I worked with some wonderful editors. I remember it was a day trip to Kabul in 2001, some that era. And I started my day at 3 in the morning. It was a chartered flight that CII was, and the certain government officials were taking to Kabul. And it was an immersion trip, and then we were coming back. And very, very long day. And I am the person who is in bed by 9, sleeping by 10:30. Even when I was young, I would prefer to do that. So I came back, and before going, we had done all the groundwork. Me and Rohit said, Malini, pura tayar karke rakho, background, sab kuch tayar karke rakho. Aap aoge, you have to just write that bit from there, so that the padding and everything is done, and you just need to write the color and stuff. No, I returned to office that day at 2 in the morning. Rohit was waiting in the office. We together, then I told Rohit that, I'm like really tired and I don't think I can write anymore. He said, Malini, you just sit here, you dictate. You tell me what you saw. we'll do it together. We did it together till 5, 6, whatever time we finished, and we sent the pages to press before we left. A boss who works alongside with you like that, it was an important value that, you don't take shortcuts in any of these things. Other things, I think it comes from the family as well, right? My father was that person that ये खिलाना पिलाना नहीं है, जितना तुम्हारा है, बाकी तुम्हारा नहीं है, तो whatever. And one incident particularly sits in my memory, which I want to talk about. So I remember I had done a critical story. It was a cover story on a car company. And it's a deep dive piece where I'd looked at this car company, and obviously they were very upset. And then the CopCom person came and told me that, Malini, this person, my boss, wants to have lunch with you. And I deliberately avoided lunches in a 5-star hotel because one, I can't afford, Baba, so मैं तो पैसा नहीं दे पाऊंगी. And okay, chai coffee चलेगा. So I said, you know what, not lunch, we'll do tea coffee. He said, okay. So we met at Oberoi for tea coffee or whatever. And then I got into the car. And this person came to see me off till the car, and then he left something at the back of my car. He was leaving something. I said, hey, what are you leaving? He said, no, some book. I said, okay, a book is fine. So I drove outside, and then I stopped the car and I looked at it. There was a Bose speaker in it. And there was a book as well, right? I was livid. I called the CopCom person. I said, this is not on. Please have it picked up from my office. Okay? And I reached office. But I took this stuff home. Okay? And my son was, I think, 7, 8 or some such. I forget now, whatever age. But he was young. And I wanted to make a point to my son. Okay? And my son was very fond of music, very whatever. But I was not in a place where I had the auqat to buy a Bose speaker. So I told him that, see, this is what happened today. Somebody left it. And I told that person to come and have it picked up. He'll come and have it picked up yesterday. And I was trying to mostly make a point to my son that something like this is not on. And my son was trying to sort of argue with me that, what's the problem? What's this? You shouldn't get influenced. Your story shouldn't get influenced. What is the harm in keeping blah, blah? He's a very young little child who's only looking at that Bose speaker and sort of talking about it. That day I felt very, very disappointed. And with a heavy heart I slept that somewhere I've gone wrong in bringing up my son. That I can't make sense to my son that this is what is not correct.
I'm sure he agrees with you today. When you're 6
so
or 7...
No, I finished the story. Mm-hmm. This happened that day and I was quite heavy-hearted that day. And after 1 month, he comes back to me. And he tells me, Mom, you remember that conversation that we had that day? I said, yeah, what happened now? So he said, you know what? I reflected on it and my respect for you has multiplied. And I really respect for what you stand for. And that day, तो वो बोलते ना हिंदी में मेरा मन गदगद हो गया. that somewhere I realized I had not sort of failed in instilling the values that I would want to see in him. So those things happened, but I think multiple things shape it. I think your family values, your personal values, and I think what you see around. I think it's a combination of all that I think shape the kind of journalist you become from a value standpoint. Right? Now on the craft itself, I'm thinking about it. So as I said, earlier I had no idea that writing was in me. I never thought I am going to become a writer. I had barely read books, actually, When I was doing history honors, I was reading history books, that's it. And there was no other time for other things that I could read. But I did get exposed to Ayn Rand and some of the other things but I was not that Mills and Boons person. So I know the girls in this college would read Mills and Boons. I would find too fluffy, too flaky to sort of even look at it. So I don't think I had exposure to good writing from that point of view, right? But I read people who were writing around me. right? And they were writing that I really loved how they captured things. So that came from reading, right? Two, I think what was good at that point of time is that Times of India had lovely library, which got all these expensive magazines from HBR to Time to Newsweek to everything that you could, including New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. And I would sit in the library a lot. So whenever I had free time, I would go and read. I think that gave me exposure to the kind of stories, possibilities that you could look at. And New York Times particularly, I remember the kind of stories that they did, which was not just a business story, but they brought so many layers to the story, right? That was an important learning curve for me, a same story can be done in so many ways. And those layered story really interested me. I also liked how some of these global publications looked at, say, maybe if they're looking at layoffs or they're looking at consumption and the kind of lens that they use to look at it. Many of them, even in Indian journalism at that point, you would not find so many of those kinds. But globally you did. And thankfully it was an era that global publications access were free. At least first 10 articles were free or whatever. So you could have access to them and you could read. And there were times that you didn't have access. You begged and asked somebody to forward you that piece. And there was something that stood out for you and you would learn that. So in terms of craft, that was it. I think sometimes bosses also helped enormously. You learned different ways of writing, different style of writing. And I experimented a lot, write first-person account, case study-based this thing. I remember I was in Seattle and I was working for Seattle Post there, right? I had gone on a fellowship in 2005 and for 6 months I was working there. And again, I knew nothing about Seattle, but I loved to soak in. And I became this reporter who was writing extensively about Indian population there. And a lot of stories came page one and in great interviews I did. So one story I did was a first-person account of what was it like for somebody working in the 24/7 industry, right, from an American standpoint. And it was an entire page they had given. I forget the entire page or whatever. It was a massive story and written in first-person account. My boss was thrilled to get it, okay, that somebody from India, a third world country in 2005 could write a piece like that. And so I experimented with some of that first-person account, different formats of writing and looking at what others did also helped inspire you, give you ideas. And global publications were a great place to look at. I've read Economist a whole lot, and that is one publication I still do. I know they are opinionated. I have a very, very strong point of view. Sometimes I may agree or many times I may disagree. But what I like is I know that which side of the argument they are, and then I can accordingly. But I also like that they offer me rounded view of the world. I mean, there is science, there is culture, there is art, there is business, there is geography, there is national politics, everything, right? I like that. It again gives me a very rounded sense of the world, of what is happening. So that's one important reading habit that that has stuck. And earlier I used to read it in the library, but now I can afford a subscription, so I have that subscription. That, and I think I still do multiple drafts of the story. Multiple drafts till the time I'm not happy. And typically sometimes I get up at 3 in the morning. I'm a morning person, so I can get up at 3, 4, but I can't be awake after 10. So I'll wake up in the morning and give it a stab, another stab till the time I'm happy with it.
This is sad. Now this means that I'm just looking at the time. We can't talk for 7 more hours because we'll be past your bedtime. So we'll have to sort of end it before that. So let's take a quick commercial break, and on the other side of the break, let's talk about your book and much else.
Oh, look forward to that, Amit. Thank you.
Have you always wanted to be a writer but never quite gotten down to it? Well, I'd love to help you. Since April 2020, I've enjoyed teaching 27 cohorts of my online course, The Art of Clear Writing, and an online community has now sprung up of all my past students. We have workshops, a newsletter to showcase the work of students, and vibrant community interaction. In the course itself, through 4 webinars spread over 4 weekends, I share all I know about the craft and practice of clear writing. There are many exercises, much interaction, and a lovely and lively community at the end of it. The course costs rupees 10,000 plus GST, or about $150. If you're interested, head on over to register at indiauncut.com/clearwriting. That's indiauncut.com/clearwriting. Being a good writer doesn't require God-given talent, just a willingness to work hard and a clear idea of what you need to do to refine your skills. I can help you.
Welcome back to The Seen and the Unseen. My great pleasure to be chatting with Malini Goyal, who's had such a fascinating journey to this point. And the overwhelming question I have at this point is that seeing your sort of proclivity to diving deep into things and finding out more about them, how is it that you didn't write a book before this? Like, through your journalistic career, were you always sort of like, did the thought cross your mind that I can write something deeper and I can, because it would seem to be a natural extension, or were you just happy with the journey the way it was going?
So I think writing book is a matter of multiple sort of things, right? And it requires a kind of time and commitment that you should be able to afford. I don't think I had the time, right? And but the moment my son got older and he was more on his feet, and I'm a single parent, right? So it became easier and easier. And then came a time that I wanted to write a book, but I didn't know what. And all journalists want to write a book at some point of time. It tests their new territories. And so this was around 2015, 2016, I had begun to think about a book. My son had gone to grade 11th or something. Yeah, grade 11th. And I thought maybe now is a good time. But what book, I didn't know. But second is, I think women often talk about it, and I do. मेरे को लगता था मेरे से किताब होएगा क्या? Can I do a book? So you question yourself, right? And it's funny because you've written all your life and still you think about that, you question that. And this book also didn't originate as a book. So I think it was 2016, 17, somewhere around that period. I was in Israel, and before going there, like usual, all new countries that I go to, I put a Google alert 1 month before where I begin to get all the news reports on the country. I begin to read. That's my pastime, favorite pastime, to read about a new country that so normally journalists would look at it like a junket, but for me it was an immersion into a new country, and it was a long journey, which would begin much earlier. So when I reached there, I'd read that book, Startup Nation, written by 2 journalists there. One journalist and one somebody from the government or startup. I forget the name of the author, sorry. And when I reached there, I realized that how a small country like Israel could position itself as startup nation so beautifully at so many levels. Journalists came together, entrepreneurs came together, governments came together. The country has something called a Chief Innovation Officer, who sits on $1 billion or more budget, right, to shape Israel's innovation sort of strategy, right? I mean, all that was very, very fascinating for me. And as we journalists were sitting in the room interviewing this Tel Aviv mayor, it occurred to me how fascinating it would be to look at the world's top 5 startup tech hubs and what makes them tick. Each of them are so distinct from the other, right? You go to Shanghai, it feels very different. Go to Berlin, it's very different. Bangalore is very different. Silicon Valley. And each of them have such unique strengths and weaknesses. And combination of that is what uniquely shapes them, including the geographical and bilateral and other reasons why they are there. So I came back and then I began to think about it. And it was just a special report. I didn't know what to do with it, but I knew that something like that would. At some point of time, I toyed with the idea of sort of immersing myself in three kinds of countries. So one was the Scandinavian countries, pick one. One was the Arab country that I wanted to. Japan was the third that I was fascinated by. China was the other, and maybe US or something. And I wanted to sort of look at the lives of women in these countries and how they are shaped by. These are like dreaming, right? And women in Gulf countries, right? They live in such different and dramatic world, right? Contrast that to us or the Scandinavian countries, which I think is heaven on earth for women particularly. So that was another project that was I was toying in my head. मुझे वो करना है, but वो बहुत complicated था, and it was also not directly relevant to my work as well. Startup and tech, I had begun to look at it by around 2010. So I was looking at that space for a while, and by 2015, unicorns were being born. Flipkart's was making headlines, and Bangalore was hitting headlines more frequently than that, and all that was happening. And that's why I thought maybe tech landscape, and this was also, we are entering a digital era, right? And tech aid, as they call it. And I thought this is a good space to explore something. And then I put together a plan for Bangalore. This is that, remember the special report I'm working on 5 countries and whatever, 5 cities, and Bangalore is one of them. And I said, Bangalore to nazdeek hai, and I will make trips as a journalist also. And I was trying to be frugal and sort of not that ambitious. And I said, okay, we'll do a special report on Bangalore first. So when I put together this plan, this is sometime in 2019. A friend of mine said, Malini, this is a fantastic book project. I didn't see it. This friend saw it. Said, this is a fantastic book project. Why don't you do a book on Bangalore? So I said, अच्छा, ये अच्छा किताब है, तो वो किताब करना है. So then the idea occurred to me, it's a book, right? And then I began to work on it as a book. And see the serendipity of it, how very organic, very serendipitously this project evolved. Then I had a friend. So all through my life, if I found somebody with whom I resonate, I immediately sort of pause and make friends and say that, I love interacting. So there's this person called Avinash Raghava. We met 1 or 2 times, but something about us resonated, right? The values, the worldview, all that. And Avinash and I became friends. And Avinash was working with Axel at that point of time. So ऐसे ही बात कर रहे थे, and for years, 80% of my meetings are without agenda. With agenda, I can pick up the phone and talk. But without agenda is where the maximum interesting conversations happen. And as a journalist, I sort of try and follow that. So Avinash also, we catching up for coffee, gupshup maar rahe the. Then I told him, Avinash, I'm working on this. He said, Malini, if you're working on a book on Bangalore, then Prashant would love to collaborate on it. I hadn't met Prashant. I knew him, but I hadn't met. So I said, okay, why don't you find out and tell me, and we'll connect on. By then, it was January of 2020, and lockdown had begun to happen. Prashant and I connected on Zoom, and we got aligned. He was totally aligned on how I had envisaged the book, which is what it is, barring 1 or 2 here and there, but it's mostly what I had put together the plan then. And I wanted to look at all layers of the city. It was not a tech layer, or it was not just startup, or not just one layer. It was a multiple sort of 360-degree view of the city that I wanted to do at that point of time. And Prashant was totally aligned. And we began to work, and lockdown happened. Pandemic sort of ruffled our lives. And then by 2021, summer, my parents, that wave that everybody went through, massive sort of disruption in their lives. It happened. My parents were hospitalized, and it was a moment of reckoning as well. What also happened is sometime in 2019, I had gone on a Vipassana. That was my first sort of Vipassana. And when I came back, my son decided to go on a Vipassana. He was 18-year-old or some such, right? And he came back, and then we were having a chat. And sometimes he talks like he's my mother, or he's my father, or whatever. He's my parent. So he sat down and he told me that, what are you doing? You want to do this book. And you are chasing this full-time job. And I was straddling two different worlds, right? Trying to also do the book and also do this thing. And he sat me down in 2020, December or something, and said, quit your job, write a book. If that's where your heart lay, you don't have to be so stretched. You middle class, financial security, this, that. So I ignored that, okay? But it was on my mind. And then he said something that, you see these 4 walls, 3 walls of your life canvas is painted. You can say it's your parent, it's this, it's circumstance, it's my this, that. The 4th wall is still khali canvas. You paint it the way you want. Don't turn 75 and tell me that because of you or because of XYZ, you were not able to paint the way you wanted it to paint. And then this 2021, this happened, the COVID thing happened, right? And I was turning 50 and I saw death of a whole lot of colleagues, friends. And it was a moment of reckoning. Jo karna hai karo yaar, life, kitna, I don't know till when you'll live. And summer of that year, Economic Times was shutting down, Sunday Economic Times, where I worked for 10 years plus. And they were telling me ET, digital sort of version or whatever. And I told myself, okay, you have to give yourself 1 year to do what you want to do. And I decided to quit. I decided, in my son's word, the middle class mentality of financial security, I quit. And I decided I said, at 50, I deserve to give myself 1 year to do something that I'm deeply passionate about. And I'll see what will happen next. Prior to that, I think I was this person who would plan, who would be structured, who would think all the pros and cons, weigh things before I actually took step. I think it was an inflection point for me as a person that I began to experiment a lot, take decisions on gut and instinct a lot. After that, I've noticed it, and that's what I'm and I feel very good about that shift inside me, that I'm able to trust my instinct, gut, and take decisions. Okay, so I quit Economic Times, and then what do? And I said I'll do things that I felt scared about, or that I wanted to do, but I've never done. So one thing I decided, I'll do podcast. I have to get over with this complex that I have about my voice, insecurity that I have about my voice. So I said that's one thing one battle I want to win. Second is the book that I wanted to finish. So I looked for a podcast opportunity, and I didn't know if I could do it. I had no idea. I was a print journalist, but ठीक है, क्या होएगा? Fail ही करेंगे ना. I'll make a fool of myself. So I'll live for that. So then I looked around. There were people who were willing to give me podcast. They said this, that. And then my ex-boss, Rohit, was at Times of India. I said, Mali, you want to do podcast? Do it for us. We'll pay you a small sum as well. I said, okay, great. And since he was my ex-boss, there is a comfort level as well, right, to get started. So I began to do a podcast for Times of India. So that one tick box happened. And then I began to work on the book. September was the first time that, pandemic was unwinding and people were starting to lead normal life. And I took my first flight to Bangalore, and I met Prashant for the first time. And it was also a very different world, right? When I came here, people were working from home, and I was staying in a guest house. This guest house had 30 odd rooms. I was the only person staying there with workers. And it was a really difficult place to be just working like that, right? But I also realized that if I have to understand the city, I have to start from the bottom, because when I was reporting in Delhi, from Delhi, talking to people on phone, it was a very top-down view of the world. I was a business journalist who knew the startup founders, who knew the investors, but I couldn't get a sense of the city, right? And I felt mere aise kitab nahi hoegi. So when I came here, I began to meet people on the street from slums, Aam Aadmi, right? In hindsight, that was the best strategy I could have deployed to work on this book. I think top-down view of the city would have been so flawed. And I just started at the bottom and met all kinds of people. And what was good about it was, before that, When I began work on the book, what I also realized that I need to be on social media. I was not a social media person. I was a fly on the wall watching people, but never very active on social media. But I realized that if this project has to take off and work, I need to cook in public, cook the book in public. So show people what's going on behind the scenes. That was an important learning, that some of the conversations I had with people as I was working on the book, and it was a very difficult transition for me because I'm that way a little more introverted in a sense. I don't like talking about myself or marketing or pitching myself, taking a selfie, putting it out. That was a very difficult journey for me. But the moment I persuaded myself and convinced myself it was important for the project, it became easier. And what happened as I was reporting, I didn't know people like on the street or even the entry level graduates or even the middle managers. I knew the founders and CEOs, right? Social media helped enormously in connecting with the kind of people I wanted to. Even the slums that I visited, right? Somebody just reached out on my DM, said, okay, I'm so-and-so and I work with this NGO. Then I just got onto the phone and I deliberately didn't reach out to people I knew because I didn't want a reportage bias in my reporting, right? So all these people were reaching out and then I got on a phone and I didn't know who the person was. There was an instinctive trust and we just spoke. He said, well, I've worked in the slums. मेरे कान खड़े हो गए. मैंने कहा slums, okay, can you take me to 2-3 slums in the city? He took me to 2-3 slums in the city. I went with him. He knew Kannada. I didn't know Kannada. And he was a fantastic sort of guide to take me around. And people like that came up. Activists, other people who I had zero connect, and they didn't know me. I was this business journalist, right? So they didn't know who I was. So for them also it was a clean slate. They had no baggage. And all kinds of people just stepped forward to sort of show me different aspects of Bangalore that they wanted to show. At some point of time, I also realized that my reportage had very huge male bias. Because most of the time, when I was calling out for names or references were coming to me, they were mostly men. I didn't like that. So then I put out a tweet again that, hey, women of Bangalore, I want to hear your stories. Tell me, especially if you are young and new to the city and young and sort of chasing your career, because I didn't want everybody to be my age, right? I wanted young people to also reach out. And then my mailbox, DM was flooded with so many women reaching out to me. That was powerful because these women I didn't know, and all kinds of women. I spent time with them because I knew that if I have to capture a flavor of the city, this young and single in the city chapter was important to capture. I would have spent time with over 40 such people in the city and spent time having meal with them, having deep conversation with them. Many people that you see in the book, those conversations would have happened over 5, 6, 7 meetings and many conversations to be able to thread narrative around their story. So such things happen. Slum was difficult. But especially language barrier was there, and language means not just Kannada, but Telugu also sometimes, Tamil also sometimes. Having those conversations were difficult, but I leaned on range of props. Like at times I had this driver who came, and I was interviewing this Ola Uber driver on the street. So there was one place in Koramangala where these people come and eat, and that place is like buzzing through the day. And that man who was selling doesn't know English, but his sons knew. So his sons translated for me. And then my driver helped me interview all the people who were coming there. And I spent half a day with all these people asking all kinds of questions. As simple as, what do you do on your phone when you are waiting for the ride, right? And you'll see them waiting on their bike and just flipping through their phone. And I would be curious, कि करते क्या हो आप लोग? कहाँ सोते हो? And there was a park where I used to frequent in Koramangala Park. And in the morning, I would go for my walk in the morning. And you would see so many cars lined up and drivers are sleeping inside them. And then deliberately, sometimes I would come later in the evening when they're up and about of this thing and have 5 minutes conversation that where you are from and what you do and some of those conversations. Or in the beginning when I came, I was working out of Excel office and Excel Launchpad office. And I was the only one working there. Everybody was working from home, but there were workers there and workers from all over. They became like a friends, right? I would sit down and have a chat with them. कहाँ से हो, क्यों आए हो, क्या कर रहे हो, क्या अच्छा है, क्या बुरा है. And many of these conversations, like anybody, I think trust is the most important barrier that you have to break down. Once you win their trust, then everything smoothens. And I spent time to sort of build that trust with many. I remember this Kormangla Park, there's this guard who would see me every morning. आते जाते ये वो, and this is COVID time, mask लगाना है, सब कुछ है, मैडम मास्क लगाओ, this that. And then sometimes I would say, सुधीर क्या हो रहा है, घर में कौन है? It transitioned from there to one day, सुधीर घर नहीं बुलाओगे चाय के लिए? तो घर बुलाया, फिर तो शर्मा गया, तो बोला मैडम संडे को आ जाओ. तो फिर संडे को मैंने फ़ोन किया, आज आ जाओ तुम्हारे घर. एंड ही सेड आ जाओ. ही इज़ फ्रॉम प्रयागराज. And then he called me home. He lives in a small room, just one room, which doubles up for everything, including a kitchen. And there is a bathroom, which is a common bathroom of the park, right? Sitting down, having a chat with him. What brought him here? What dreams he has for kids? So there was a time that I had some time between my meetings, and my driver was, I said, where do you live? So he said, मैम बहुत दूर है. मैंने कहा कितना दूर है? बोला 45 minutes ride. मैंने कहा चलो, मेरे पास टाइम है, 3 घंटा टाइम है, ले चलोगे घर? So he took me home. I sat with his wife and kids and we just spent time. I was trying to understand people because these people are not articulate, right? You need to spend time with them to understand instinctive things that they will not be able to articulate. So I was trying to understand how did his life change? How does he look? And he's a Kannadiga. He was a Kannadiga, right? From North Karnataka. I was trying to understand how does he see the change? How has his life changed? And he said, when I came here in early 2000, my salary was around 20 and today I earn around 25. But at that point of time, I didn't have biwi bacha, right? Today I have got kids and this thing, and 25 is nothing today's world. So clearly there were parts of the society that was hurting, and they were not sort of keeping, and their incomes were not keeping pace to the growth. But there was another part where you saw, even in that segment, people had just blossomed and began to dream and dream big and achieve big. I remember there's one guy I met. It's a powerful story. It's there in the book as well. So this guy came to Bangalore as a 13, 14-year-old. And he came via Coimbatore. So he was from Assam. Came via Coimbatore to here. And he came as a guard first, right? And he was held hostage by a subcontractor, where he was not given food, nothing, locked in, a bunch of them locked into a room for 3 days, and he narrated that story. And when he came here, he knew no other language except Bengali. Then slowly he grew, and he finished his 10th. I think he finished his 12th. Today he works for a large security agency, multinational. So he has a full-time job, and he supplied over, I don't know, I may be getting the numbers wrong, either hundreds or thousands of people to the security agency. And when I was leaving, he said, Madam, if you get to know of somebody who wants like workers, security guards, or any kind of worker, please tell me. I'm ready to scale up. And he had done, I think, 5,000 or some such numbers already. Like he brought in people and supplied to the agencies here. And I saw people like that, and he was earning around 80, 90,000 or more than that. Somebody who came like 5,000, 6,000 over a period of 10 years, 12 years. And you saw so many people come here with nothing. And I think it's a story that you see play out all across other big cities. And I'm sure Delhi, Bombay would have. But what hit you here is that these growth stories were often crunched in very short span of time. like within 10 years or within 5 years, these people have sort of dramatically evolved in their ambitions, in their chase. That was very, very something that stood out for me, at least, when I looked at them. What else? I'm going to pause.
One of the things that strikes me is that at one level, you could look at life for migrants in any of the big cities, and it feels nasty and brutish, and it feels almost brutal at some points. And at another level, you see the same people, and this is probably truer the lower down you go in terms of strata, are so often incredibly open and friendly and welcoming. Just when you think that, oh my God, every day for this person is just such a nightmare, it's just horrible, they possibly can't wait to go to sleep to escape the day. And yet, time and again, I've heard from various people and experienced myself that the sort of openness and friendliness you get is off the charts. And I'm sure you agree with that. But what do you think explains it? What do you think explains it? And is there something that also tells us about the essential loneliness of urban life? That anyone reaching out at a human level is a welcome opportunity, no matter who they are.
So, one, I think there's nuance in all these conversations, Amit. It's not that everybody is against or everybody is for. So let's just get that out of the way. I think during my conversation, I've met so many people who are Kannadiga. I remember meeting an auto driver and asking, so he's an old auto driver, I can see it. And so I just took extra 10 minutes before I'm getting off it आप बताओ अपने बारे में कहाँ से हो क्या हो, and he's been riding auto for a very long time. So I said, you like the change, do you not like the change? He said, madam, अगर change ये नहीं आता तो हमारी ये income किधर से आता? नहीं आता ना. So I earn this much. I said, are you happy with it? I said, then he said that, okay, unhappy, I could have done this, that. But the thing is, the growth has brought, the limited point he was making, the growth has brought prosperity in our lives, right? Going back to, so at the bottom, yes, all human beings are the same. I think what happens is, at a level where you belong to a different strata, that is, you are the professional, well-qualified, well-heeled, globe-trotting workers, right? You are cushioned from some of the hardships that go into the making of the migrant underclass, as you would want to call it, right? Because one, they don't have the money, they are exposed to the range of flashpoints that they are not able to sort of witness. We retreat in our gated communities in many ways, right? We are not that exposed to it, and we speak a language which is a common language here. So one, there is a class barrier that definitely what we experience and what the underclass experiences and the migrant workers at the bottom experiences are two different worlds. But you also see that incidents of some of these things have been rising, right? It's also because I think what Santosh Desai mentioned, that, this city has grown so rapidly, so sharply and so dramatically that many people feel they are being run over by the outsiders coming into the city. All the top jobs are being taken away by them, right? So that is there. But I also feel that global cities, all global cities from London to New York, look at them and they are multicultural, multinational in who reside there. And there is a journey in between, like you are a small town and you are this multicultural global city. There is a journey that you have to cover from that small town to being that multicultural city. And that journey in the middle is full of friction points. And all global cities must transition that to become that. From Silicon Valley to New York to London, they have all sort of today are really world class in terms of the kind of people, how they look at outsiders. There's no insider. Bombay is like that. I mean, you go there, you don't feel. I mean, the range of languages, range of accents with which people speak, and they seem okay. Bombay has reached that. I think Bangalore has to reach at some point of time there. That will be, we say that Bombay is a global city, but that is an important marker on that journey that it needs to cover. Sorry, I lost track. We were
My broad question was not so much about the approach that people have towards migrants, so that we can talk about that as well, but also about, your experience with, like, within the book, it seems, and from what you were saying, is that people were always very open with you, very friendly with you, very happy to talk. And that's something that always leaves me a little surprised, because at one level you imagine that, you know, you've got enough shit going on in your life. You're not going to be friendly with random stranger coming and asking questions and etc etc. And yet they do often, so often let you in. Yet they do often surprise you with
So
friendliness.
one is, Amit, that over the years you learn that skill not to be intimidating. I think that is very, very important. And I have done similar reportage. I've gone on similar assignments in UP villages, some of the most backward villages in Haryana, and many other parts in Maharashtra, Jharkhand, all that. I think that experience trains you how not to intimidate people. You as dress down as much as possible. You look as normal as, and I'm a woman, right? And I will stand out even in that surrounding. You learn to talk their language. You learn to sit with them on the floor, make them feel comfortable. Second is, I think there were times that somebody didn't open up, right? And it happened multiple times. And you respect that as well, that some people may not. Third is that I think you don't be impatient. You are not talking to a CEO in a boardroom who will be articulate and who will tell you what you are looking for. You have to be extremely patient with some of these people, earn their trust before you ask any questions. Like I told you about this guard, like I told you about this driver, many maids, and in the morning I would go out, and even the municipal workers, right? There was language barrier, but just a smile and good morning, and that sort of opened them up. And then one occasion, she's in a thoughtful mood, and you found somebody who can translate the language. You sit down with her and ask one or two questions. Aapka bacha kidhar hai? And she'll tell you some small things like that. So I think with interviewing executives, well-heeled executives, is so much easier than getting trust of these people. There are so many barriers, class barriers, economic, social, language, and you have to cross that to be able to. And winning their trust was very, very important. And often I was not an aggressive reporter. I'm not an aggressive reporter anyway, but definitely with them I had enormous patience. 2, 3, 4th meeting and I'm okay. And even with educated people, right, if there were deep personal stories to be told, you want to wait. You want to earn their trust. They should feel comfortable to be able to open up to you. And if they don't open up, even then, it is okay. You don't feel like, I remember there is a couple that is off the record, right? We would have met 3, 4 times. We would have had multiple rounds of conversation. Then I played back the entire section to them. They were earlier, okay, we are fine. And then after reading it, they said, Malini, it's too personal. Can we keep it off the record? And you learn to respect that. I think as a journalist, if there is one thing I will never dilute is the trust in the people that I'm interviewing. That is, in fact, there are times that people haven't even told me that play back the quotes and I've played back. Not because of anything. It's just that their trust matters to me a whole lot than anything else. It's old style journalism, but I think it is a very important part. Human trust is important.
You've described in your book how Bangalore is a city of change, not just in the context of, change over time or so on and so forth. You've pointed out that, if you are in 1800 and you wake up now, of course it has changed. If you are in 1900 and you wake up now, of course it has changed. If you are in 2018 and you wake up now, it has changed, So it doesn't matter what the time span is. It is just changing massively, and it's mind-blowing to that extent. I think you quoted Nandan Nilikani in your book of pointing that out and all that. So paint me a picture of the broadest of those changes, like maybe over 100 years or 150 years. Because I remember when I was growing up, as you've pointed out in the book, in my imagination, Bangalore is garden city, retired people city, weather is great all year, and etc. That's what we heard about it. So give me a sense of what are the sort of historical forces bringing it here. Because the other thing that I find interesting, and in your book somebody even uses the phrase virtuous cycle, and it seems to me that with any place there is always a virtuous cycle where once it evolves in a particular way, people are coming just because there are people like that there, and it feeds itself and it becomes this beautiful thing. So if you want to, work in a place with this kind of energy and this kind of labor and this kind of capital, you end up coming here and the network effects multiply. But I'm trying to think of even before that, what is it about Bangalore in the first place, well before the 80s, well before the tech boom happens? What is it about this place that it would eventually become the city that attracts all of this?
So I'll answer this question in two parts. There are things in the city that I heard again and again was true in the 60s and 70s is as true today, okay? And there are things that's changing so dramatically, so quickly, that people can't wrap their heads around it, right? So I remember talking to, I forget the name. Let me just try and remember the name. Somebody came in the 60s. The name will come to me later. He had done his PhD from US and he'd returned. He was from Hyderabad, and he wanted to return to only Hyderabad, right? This is the 60s and 70s. And this was this PSU city, and everything was, it was a town, a PSU town, there is HAL town, all that, colonies, right? And then he came here because everybody in the research field, in the electronics area, this was the electronics hub, right? All the government ITIs and electronic labs, etc., were being set up here. What?
You're referring to Sridhar Mitta?
Yes, Sridhar Mitta, correct. So Sridhar Mitta came here and he wanted to go to Hyderabad, and but somehow Wipro wanted to set up its unit here, and Sridhar Mitta came here in the city. So what hasn't changed is some of this top talent who were looking for places to locate, for one reason or the other, located here. So in the 60s and 70s, since it was the PSU era which hired the top talent in the city got the top talent. At that time, it was PSUs which were hiring. Now it is the tech industry which is hiring. So that is something, it's a constant. And reasons have changed. At that time, it was some PSU. Later, it is IT outsourcing. Then it is MNC R&D hub. And then now it is startups, right? And now it is at a global level. India is kind of rising up in terms of tech flavor, its tech journey. It's just the other day, Paul Graham was tweeting that India is often the place that people are thinking of, and 20 years back he would have questioned that, but today he understands that and he's actually betting on it, right? So that. Now, second thing that was particularly very interesting is the women and how they looked at their world. So I remember somebody, and this is more recent, 70s, 80s, because I didn't meet too many going back too long back, that women and people from down south particularly saw this place as a very cosmopolitan, modern, liberal-minded world. It was almost like a foreign destination made of dreams. So this was a dream city for many. And this I heard not just from women, but I'll come to the women later, but so many people from Kerala, from Chennai, from Hyderabad, down south. This was the dream city, where you got beer, you got clubs, you got this, you got that they didn't get in that part of the world. It's the kind of lifestyle, aspirational. So this was an aspirational city for many, very cosmopolitan, modern, liberal. From women, what I heard was, here was a place nobody judged you. Like they could wear their sleeveless, they could wear their shorts, they could hang around with their boyfriends, they could smoke, they could be out till late night and they were okay. This was particularly that stood out for women, and the women were from all over. And all these things are relevant till now. And I hear versions of this story still. I know everything in life is relative, and again, it's relative that women still think if they come from Delhi to here, like I felt, this place is a relatively safer place for women to hang around. This is still far more cosmopolitan, liberal, open-minded. Of course, Bombay would be ahead of that, but still this is one of the most cosmopolitan, open, liberal-minded. And now expats have joined, NRIs have joined that wave. Like over the last 20, 30 years, especially from early 2000 to now, that wave is only building up, right? Any Indian overseas who wants to relocate to India, for them, India is the first city. Bangalore is the first city that they look at. Bombay, for whatever reason, the quality of life, chase, all that they don't. Delhi, the culture, the aggression, all that puts them off. This is the city, temperate city, where everybody can come and feel normal and feel settled. So these are the ways people think the city hasn't changed. But there are ways that city has changed. And I'll tell you one interview that we had with Rahul Dravid. And he was speaking about, he grew up in Indiranagar, right? And Indiranagar, he remembers, wherever they were living, there were only empty plots and fields and everything, and they would play cricket, right? And then slowly he saw where they were playing, construction happening, then they moved to another, then another, and slowly all these open places where they used to play as children kind of got taken over, got built out. And I remember speaking to a bureaucrat, and again, sorry, I'm blanking out. He was a fairly senior bureaucrat, and I met him at Indiranagar, right? And he was mentioning when in the 80s he shifted to Indiranagar. People said, "Dimag kharab ho gaya hai. Going back of the beyond boondocks. Who lives in Indiranagar?" And his was one of the first building that had come up, right? And there were no telephone lines. This is the 80s, right? And then today Indiranagar is like what a bustling, overcrowded, jam-packed, traffic, gridlocked city, suburb that it can be. So that is the kind of real estate is one of the biggest marker of this shift. And Nandan talks about it as well, that in 2009 when he began spending more and more time in Delhi, so he kind of lost a little touch with Bangalore at that point of time because he's spending a lot of time in Delhi. So by 2014, when he kind of started living in Bangalore and he lives in Koramangala, he said, "I couldn't recognize the city. I didn't know what had happened. This was this startup wave all around me and I couldn't recognize it." And this is the span of 2009 to 14, right? It's just so short. But that I've heard so many times. I myself, I came here in 2021. I live in Koramangala ST bed layout now, and I moved to this area in 2022 January. Between then to now, I can tell you 4 or 5 big residential complexes have come up. Many, many more are under construction. I haven't seen this frenetic space of construction anywhere else. So real estate is one of the biggest markers of it. Second is, I think, what amazed me is when people came here, 3, 4, 5, 6,000 salary, and suddenly they are an entrepreneur earning something, even at the bottom of the pyramid, right? Those people. That was the big change that I saw, that people who came and who made a certain success out of their life here, chasing their dream. I particularly sort of want to recall this guy. I call him Dani. He's there in young and single in the city, and he came here in 2020 or some such time just before pandemic or during pandemic. And what he was and what he is kind of changed a lot. And he comes from he's discovered himself, he's discovered his dream. He's bought 2 plots in Chennai, all at the age of he's under 30. So people have learned to dream in the city, how this city has enabled them to dream, right? But also it's been a difficult city for many. That also is there. I remember this guy called Kevin, and I used to go to his parlor for a haircut, right? And I deliberately... because I'm that person that once I cultivate relationship, I like that, to go to the same person again and again. So I would go on over multiple meetings and catch-ups, and along with my haircut, we would chat. And finally, one day we sat down for a long chat, 2-3 hours. And then he opened up, and he came as a 12th pass, dropped out of college, started with 0 salary in a salon industry. And he knew no skills, had no skills. He learned on the job. And today he runs a parlor and pays a rent of, I forget now, 90,000 or some such, right? He employs whatever, 5, 6, 7, 8 people. And he earns substantially. He sends money home. His wife sends money home. That kind of dream. So he's made that big growth and realizing his dream. But also at some level, he's a little heartbroken because he's from Northeast. He looks different. And he experienced that in his daily life. And he's so conflicted that does he belong here? Because this city is where he learned to dream and achieve his dream. But there are times that he questions, does he belong here? Should he at some point of time, pack his bag and go? And you particularly hear this story at the, this services economy, which is catering to the tech boom, right? For them, it's been, some of these things have been challenging.
Yeah, I guess the people at the higher end of the tech boom, migration, etc., they're insulated from all of this
Absolutely.
in their workspaces and in their cafes and all of that. But it is a service economy which has come up to support them, which would sort of not be able to get away from this. I'm also struck by, I'm thinking of what are the deeper sort of factors which makes the city welcoming for outsiders. I guess one itself would be that if there is a city where outsiders tend to go, then automatically it will treat them a little better and automatically other outsiders will be drawn in and that becomes a virtuous cycle. Historically, what is your sense of how much a part it has played? At one point in your book, you write, the 24th Maharaja of Mysore, Krishna Raja Vadiyar IV, 1902 to 1940, must also get credit for bringing in a progressive and liberal social outlook. Ahead of the times, he pushed for women's education, introduced compulsory primary education, and directed public schools to give up caste discrimination and admit Dalits. He actively promoted industry and pushed for civil projects like the Krishna Rajsagar Dam Reservoir in Mandya district and KR Hospital in Mysore. Under his reign, Bengaluru became Asia's first city with electrified streets in 1905, stop quote. And there's a lot happening before him. You could argue that some of the setting which allowed him to do all this was perhaps laid by Kempe Gowda long ago, centuries ago, and so on and so forth. And of late, one of the things I've realized is that you have to look further back in history than you think. Like when people speak about the Kerala model, for example, and how well it's done, it's not just about the communist parties in independent India. There's a lot of stuff happening there for the centuries before that leads you to this place where society, has this quality or that quality and all of that. So a couple of things, do you feel that culturally, there are aspects which make Bangalore and Karnataka very conducive for this? And two, is there a danger of that changing over time? As the city grows so fast and changes so fast, is there a danger that will also be one of the things to change?
So one, you are 100% right that roots, it all goes back to the roots, right? And when Kempe Gowda sort of set up the different petes, right? Chikpete, this was a trading hub. And all kinds of people were coming here to trade, right? And remember, this is one city which is so close to 6 states, right? 5-6 hours drive, 5 to 8 hours drive, and you are in another state. So you have, and especially during the British time, because it was a cantonment city, many people from Madras Presidency, Hyderabad, and other sort of places, they came to this city for seeking livelihood and range of professions, right? So right from that time, what struck me is I've had help, part-time help. I've met Nepalese, I've met Oriya, I've met Bengali, I've met Tamilian, I've met Malayali, Kannadiga. I don't think I've ever encountered such a diverse variety. And they all have been here for a very long time, except some of them are recent, but many of them are here. So this rainbow color of so many different kinds of people who've come and made this city a home, it's a historical thing. It was there, in fact, I remember there was a film that Naresh Narasimhan, he's an architect and also engaged in a lot of other work in the city. He was filming, he was showcasing. And I think long back, 100 years back, this film was there, and then they said, Ki, what is the language here? And then Kannada is the language. And then somebody speaks in Tamil and say, but I'm a Tamil. And then somebody says, I'm a Malayalam. And then, so even long back then, people were speaking multiple languages. This is a polyglot city, 107 languages spoken, right? And so the fact is that the city has had a tradition of all kinds of people coming and settling down. And it has only gotten reinforced again and again. So during Kempegowda time, it was Petes and stuff. During British colonial time, it was the cantonment that drew people from there, from different parts of the country. Then PSU time, this was the most meritocratic job. If you were from IITs, you only got into our PSUs, right? And so there only if you were meritocratic and you got through IIT, you got here, right? So it didn't discriminate over caste, gender, this, that. You just got in, right? So at that time, again, people from all over were coming, but for a very different reason. Then 70s, 80s, when the IT outsourcing boom happened, it was the most aspirational job at that point of time. Dollar dreams, where can you get? So 80s, 90s shaped that. And again, it further sort of took this cycle of luring workers from all over the country with a different spin, IT outsourcing. Early 2000, again, sort of brought in not just people from all over India, but this dot-com bust that happened. And it brought many Indians from overseas. And I do remember, even as a journalist, I saw so many expats coming to Bangalore. Wim Elfrink, I remember, Cisco globalization officer. He was a global CXO. And he relocated to India and Bangalore, right? So expat wave that happened during early 2000. So it has only gotten more layers over the years. Now it's a range of foreigners coming from all over, from Europe, from Asia, from China, from Russia. All kinds of expats that I have met are coming here. So different streams of influx of migrant influx has been happening. So that's the first part of the question, that the city had roots, and somehow the city has managed to keep those roots alive and fresh, and only add new flavors to it, and get better, strengthen that. And today the startup world is luring a lot of people. Now, will that wane? Will that weaken? So one doesn't know right now. See, the thing is, if I look at Silicon Valley, and that's the only parallel that I can look at. Silicon Valley has lots of challenges. The percentage of global venture fund that flows into Silicon Valley as a percentage has come down at a global level over the last 20, 30 years, simply because other alternative venture ecosystems have emerged, including India. Right? So as a percentage it has. But if you ask me if today there is all the AI and where it is happening, it's Silicon Valley. Right? And somehow it has managed to reinvent itself. And for now, at least, some of the future building blocks of the startup ecosystem. Let me give you one example. So in the defense sector typically does not appear on your horizon if you look at Bangalore, right? This is not the place. Government has been trying very hard to build in UP, there's a defense corridor being built. And a lot of investments are going in, a lot of government incentives and government push, nudge. Ditto is happening in Gujarat, ditto MROs, etc. They tried in MP. Now, nobody tried for Bangalore. None of them pushed for Bangalore as far as defense is concerned. But what has happened is, because of the talent density that exists in this city, remember the transition that happened in automobile industry from hardware to software. So hardware is getting commoditized. It's a software which is not a differentiation where the differentiation exists, right? It's happening in the defense as well, where the hardware, the hardware is the commoditized. It's a software that goes into it where the value add is beginning to happen. Now, annually, the Defense Ministry does a startup competition in the defense sector, especially for defense startup. And a lot of those startups are coming from Bangalore. There is one defense company based in MP. I forget the name. They do explosives, etc. And they are based in MP. Now they set up the new unit in Bangalore. Now, why is this happening? Nobody is attracting. The city has enough on its plate, and I'm sure government isn't luring them aggressively that other states are, like UP is, like Telangana is. But it is happening, right? And it is happening. The biggest virtuous cycle is the talent. And this I've heard from many people. Like, you can't lure somebody to Gujarat, another city where that landscape ecosystem does not exist. It's similar, I've heard, from a product. So I was speaking to one guy who is in the product space working in Pune. I said, why are you here? Why did you come? And he said, just wahan pe monthly meet we used to have. He was saying, and product guys, right? So, but monthly mein, the number of people you would meet in that special meetup, monthly meetup. Here you go into a restaurant in Indiranagar on one evening and you meet so many product guys. Now remember, the network effect is a powerful effect you can't replicate easily. So what is most compelling about this city, and I just hope that this city doesn't lose, is the software. I call it 5G software and 2G hardware that this city has. I mean, everything in the infrastructure of the city is crumbling, creaky. There are roads, potholed roads, garbage, this, that. But the software of the city is so good that it is able to sort of withstand the weakness on the hardware side. And on the software, it is able to be this pull. And remember that software is harder to sort of compete on. I mean, you can build roads, you can build everything, but how do you build culture of the city? One of the most powerful thing, at least I heard here, is the paid forward culture, right? And one, you think one is just puffing things up or it's a good PR. But I heard this again and again from so many people that I actually have begun to feel it's not puff and it's not PR. So many founders have told me that when they were nothing and they were struggling, somebody just came up with no skin in the game, decided to support him, decided to back him, decided to help him, decided to counsel him, put in money or whatever. And it has happened so many times with so many people that I know that it can't be puff. It can't be just PR. And it has happened with so many people. I mean, I remember Ether Energy, right? Tarun there. And I know Tarun since 2014-15 when he was in IIT Chennai and he was nobody and he's struggling. And then he was telling me that for the first time when he was trying to raise, and then he reached out to Flipkart founder Sachin Bansal. He knew nothing. He knew nobody. And he was nobody. And he responded. And he said, come and meet me.
And this is 2014 or something, I think you said.
2014, 15,
yeah,
15,
so they're already big.
Yeah, and Flipkart is big.
Exactly.
And Ether is nothing. He's working out of a IIT Chennai campus. And he said he could have not responded. I mean, 1,000 people reach out to people like that. No, he responded. He came, he met him. And he said the energy that he saw here, that meeting was a pivotal point that he decided to move out of IIT Chennai to here, right? That was that meeting. And then Sachin at the end of the conversation, why are you guys in Chennai? Come here. And whatever, the reasons were multiple, but he decided to move here. And then what happened? He said, we tried very hard to raise funds. We ran out of options. We had staked, we all whatever personal money, this, that, and we had run out of options. We would have shut down. So as a last ditch effort, he messaged Sachin, and that was a big billion-day sale, right? He knew that Sachin won't have that time to even look at his phone, but he messaged him. And Sachin responded within an hour. They met that evening. Not only that, he said, okay, this one entire sort of round I will take care of. And version of that I've heard from so many people, Amit, that's something I think is also important about the city. The other bit that occurs to me, especially I'm coming from Delhi, right? Delhi has a very different culture. It's a very hierarchical culture, right? And getting into that inner circle is difficult if you are an outsider. And I've felt it. In fact, in 3 years, like 35 years when I was in Delhi, and people would say Delhiite, and I would think if I'm a Delhiite or not. And I would look at my roots and stuff and analyze things, right? Because markers of being in Delhi is like you have to be branded, what car you drive and where you live. And all those are important markers, which meant nothing to me. I'm not that person. So many times I was that misfit in that city from that point of view. This city is much more open. This city is willing to accept you without judgment. What you wear means nothing to anybody. And I think that openness allows people to be welcomed, irrespective of those some external sort of markers by which we judge people. So, okay, I lost the train of thought that I'm trying to think the point I was trying to make.
You're talking about cultural commonalities, and you first spoke about how there is that welcoming, sort of paying it forward kind of trait, which is so common and so powerful and is a part of the culture.
Yeah. So I was coming to the network effect of the city, and this city feels like everywhere there's a campus vibe. Nahi? Campus में when you are stay in the hostel ना, you have a problem. अच्छा तुम मेरा वो दोस्त है, he will solve that problem for you. Go this one, that one, and there is certain bonhomie that sort of exists, right? I find that here so much, and without being very transactional. Okay, it happens often that even today, and at Unboxing BLR that we are building. There are so many times I'm grappling with a problem I don't know how to answer. And I will tap into this, that, all kinds of people. So many people have just said, okay, Malini, I'll just come volunteer and I'll do this for you. So many times. And they have nothing to gain. But they are willing to handhold me through that journey. That has happened very easily. So that network effect where people will just step up and say, Acha, chalo, I'll do it for you, even if I don't get. So that happens. The other bit I particularly experienced when I was working on this. So this project began as a book, right? None of what we are doing today was anyway planned. Nothing was planned. It was just a book, and I was supposed to go back to the city, to Delhi, where I had home. This is 2022, March, April. And I'm deep inside the book, and Prashant and I are chatting, and then it occurs to me, Prashant, this city has such tech legacy, and we should try and document and capture. The city should try and document and capture. He said, yeah. So I said, why don't we think of a digital museum? So he said, why digital museum? I said, physical museum is capex. Huh? How would you sort of look at it? He said, no, we should think about physical museum, right? Now, I had already decided in my head physical museum is not possible. But this city is also about possibilities, right? You will at least give it your best try.
You've quoted Nitin Kamath from Zerodha as saying this is the city of irrational optimism, which seems to fit. Yeah.
So, and then Prashant said, no, we should try and make it happen. And today where we are, if all goes well, fingers crossed, we will have India's first startup tech innovation museum in the next 3 to 4 years. Highly experiential, world class. We have looked at some of the top museums in the world which have deployed technology to help you experience it. Now, coming from Delhi and coming from a sector which was already like media is on a slowdown, right? It's degrowing. It's going through a rough phase. Dreaming doesn't come very easily. The thinking of possibilities doesn't come easily. One of the largest shift I find is I'm opening to the world of possibilities here, right? I mean, there are things that you think you can do. At least you'll give it a try. You'll fail, na? Kya hoega? Fail hi hoge na? Nahi kar paoge na? But what is the harm of giving it a try? Last year it happened. So this is the museum, right? Last year, I remember around July, Prashant came to me and he said, Malini, we'll do a city festival. And we had a book launch in November. I told him, please don't do. Our time kidhar hai? There's no time. December is like, I had no bandwidth. I have no knowledge of a city festival, right? he said, we'll do soft launch. And with the kind of conviction he talks that you like, okay, karne ka hai, soft launch karenge. Now, he's convinced, then you only have to align with that, right? And फिर, okay, so karna hai, so we'll put our best foot forward. We tried to, and by October, November, Amit, it's art of, how everybody came together. Ravi Chandar, in October, he came on board as sort of the festival director. He calls himself chief facilitator. We call him festival director. He came on board as that. So many people just stepped up. Michael Foley, who is a brand design, whatever, he said, okay, I'll do pro bono your brand sort of template and brand design. He did it within 2 days, 2 or 3 days, right? We had a presentation to the government. So many other people. I remember Sonia Manchanda, who's done work at the airport. She did some other work, many of it pro bono. And these people just stepped up, saying, okay, you need this help, we'll support you. And eventually government came on board as a partner. We needed their blessings. Many of the permissions, etc., like music in the park, right? We needed government permissions to enable that, and we got that. And eventually, at the end, in December, when this happened, we didn't know this would happen. We had 50 plus partners, 65 plus venues, 500 plus events that we did in this city, all in a matter of 3 months.
Wow.
We wouldn't have been able to accomplish if all these people didn't align, or all these people didn't step up, if all of us didn't collaborate to make things happen. So many volunteers who just came in, said, Malini, I want to volunteer for this. Can I do something for you? And they just came on board.
I'd done an episode with Ravi Chandra 6 years back, if I remember correctly, and described himself as a commissioner of lost causes. And I'm just thinking that it's only if you chase those lost causes that you get the big wins and you change the world. So I just kind of love that spirit so much. Quick question about the book, going back to it. The last census, as you have pointed out, was in 2011, right? This is a city that is changing in like tectonic ways every month, practically, right? And your book I found to be just the perfect mix of both great stories and human stories, and the impressionistic accounts of what the city is like, and at the same time really rigorous, fantastic data. And I'll double click on some of it. But how was your approach towards this? Because it would have seemed like such a huge challenge to get credible data and to figure out what's going on with it, and yet you managed so well. So what happened?
So I'll tell you, in fact, I must talk about this because I think I was a first-time author, okay? And in December 2021, I'm in this guest house and I have to submit these 2 chapters as part of my proposal for the publisher. And I'm shitting bricks. And I have reached a stage where I tell myself, मेरे से ये नहीं होएगा. It seems like too daunting a task, and because I'm doing things in the public, so on social media, and people are anticipating, I've built a bit of anticipation, and I'm getting crushed under it. And the moment I sat down to write, and I'm writing the first chapter, I've done quite a bit of reporting, but still I find myself totally inadequate, totally ill-equipped, and I tell myself, मेरे से नहीं होएगा. I've spent 2-3 weeks just laboring over it. Nothing is happening. Typical imposter syndrome. And I'm Googling how to write.
Oh my God.
How to write and how to this. And I can't confess to anybody, right? And then I reach out to 2-3 author friends. How do you write? How do you structure? And because I knew that what I had done as a journalist, I had told myself what I had done as a journalist is irrelevant now. The book writing is a different ballgame, and I'm doing this for the first time, so I'm starting from ground zero. And मुझे कुछ नहीं आता. So 25 साल का writing career I have written off in my head, and I'm starting all over again, right? But conversations helped. I spoke to all kinds of people who've written books to understand what was their writing journey. And I'm not telling them that this is what I'm going through, okay? And I'm just asking what happened, how did you prepare? Many of them suggested a writing drill that I found it very complicated. I thought, mere se nahi hoega. And they were so catalogued. Some had things on the wall, sticky notes, etc. After reading all that, then I decided that I will not go through the chronological order, because everybody, 2-3 people had recommended you should go the chronological order of the book, because that is how you'll be able to, because writing a book is different than writing a story in the newspaper. But I went with my gut instinct and I said, the first 2 chapters I'll write, which will be the easiest for me to write, and which is what I'm deeply invested in at a personal level, which is the startup couples and young and single in the city. They were the most fascinating and interesting sort of chapter for me. And I told myself, Abhidhar se shuru karte. They are the easiest for me to write. And I wrote those 2 chapters. It became easier. So that was one challenge I faced, that as an author, first time I questioned this imposter syndrome, almost sort of handicapped me to a level that I almost froze in my writing. The writer block that they talk about, I was totally hemmed in by that. But somehow writing these 2 chapters opened me up, okay? And then yet I was not convinced. Writing is a solo journey. You are in this dark tunnel. You don't even know what you're doing is good or not. So when the first time my literary agent sort of reverted back on my proposal, and she said she loved it. More than anything, there was a sigh of relief. मतलब बकवास नहीं है. So this is okay. This is good work. Some way of reinforcement from outside was very important to gain some confidence in writing, and which I think was very, very important. Then after that, you're absolutely right. The data was totally missing, and I tried hard. I tapped into some of my past networks like QuestCorp to sort of get team leads for some other data on jobs. And you are right that city is changing so rapidly that 2011 census is like archaic. In any other city, it wouldn't be. Even in Delhi and Bombay, it wouldn't be so irrelevant. But in this city, it would be. But what I did realize is certain trends would still play out. And I would want to at least look at that trend. What is it telling us? Because anecdotally, I could see some of the things play out. Like I saw single women staying alone and working at a lower level, right? Incidents of that far more in this city than I found in Delhi, where I've lived for years, and in Bombay, where I live limited, but I go there frequently. My sister used to stay there. So anecdotal evidence were telling me things that I wanted to explore. And then when I started looking at census data, which was the most credible data that I could lay my hands on, I got reinforcement there, right? They were corroborating some of the trends that I was witnessing by reportage. So I began to connect the dots. And then going forward, I know they will amplify. Second level was I did have 2.5 decades of tracking labor job market. So that was very, very handy for me. My networks in that space where I could reach out to people, ask them for views, my own sort of understanding of that space, how things have evolved. As a job reporter, my first job cover in India today was early 2000. From then to now, I had looked at that space very long. So all that helped enormously as well. And then, of course, working with IIHS, with how India Lives, a startup which analyzed for that. In fact, that laid the seed for one project that we are working on, and I'm going to talk a bit about that. So we are right now working on a project called Bangalore in 100 Charts. Okay, it's an annual data report on Bangalore. We look at Bangalore through 3 or 4 lenses. Bangalore today versus Bangalore past. Bangalore versus other Indian cities, Delhi, Bombay, Hyderabad, Chennai, Kolkata, and Pune. And Bangalore versus other global tech hubs. And we are looking at 3-4 sets of data: government data, regulatory data, and then platform data. Of course, taking care of all the anonymization and stuff, privacy concerns, and then some global data, right? And we are trying to build a sort of story about the change, and we will, of course, be sort of compromised on the current data. census data is not available, but we'll try and make sense of it. And satellite data also, some of it will come in. And that laid the seed, because the challenges that I was gripped with when I was writing this book, I persuaded Prashant, let's do this annual data report, and we are working on it. In the next 1 or 2 months, it will be out. It's an annual day. Again, it will be very snackable data, very reader-friendly, not for data expert. This is for a lay person. What I felt is that, this city has changed so rapidly that many times even perception is so far behind the reality. And I'll give you one example. Till 2000, this city did not have one international flight. Today, this is the third largest aviation hub in the country. By the looks of it, this will be the second largest over the next 10 to 20 years. It will beat Mumbai, right? And the ripple effect will be felt by rising number of consulates that are coming up, the direct international flights that it's coming in, the city emerging as aviation hub at multiple levels like Air India, etc. You are beginning to see all that. All that telltale signs are there. What about tax? What about bank deposits? These are real data that is telling you the growth. This is the second largest market for iPhones. This is, I think, the second largest market for automobile after Delhi. Karnataka gets the largest FDI in the country. And Karnataka, please take Bangalore as proxy to... Bangalore is proxy, right? This is the place where maximum is happening. So all this is the different prism of change that is happening in the city, which many times, at least I sitting in Delhi, didn't know the change that was happening. And I think it's important for a city to talk about, especially a city which is amid so much change. It's important to, and this project probably will help us do that.
It sounds amazing. And, those 2 chapters that you mentioned you wrote first are amazing. I mean, the whole book is great. In fact, you spoke of the imposter syndrome. It's so frustrating for me that of all the guests who come on my show, all the women talk about imposter syndrome. No man has ever brought it up, right? Men are like, hum kar lenge, I'll do it. I had the conviction, blah, blah, blah. All the women are full of it. So I just want to put it on record and say that, first of all, you should never have, had those doubts about your voice, because your voice is great, as all my listeners will attest. It's fantastic. I'm sure you were a great podcaster and you should do more of it. And the book is so wonderful that it kind of boggles the mind that you had any self-doubt to begin with. One of the most creative uses of data in the book, which I really loved, was the Tinder data you got to look at the lives of young people in Bangalore vis-a-vis young people in Delhi and Bombay and all of that. It's almost kind of mind-blowing, and I have so many follow-up questions for that. But tell me a little bit about, how you even thought of doing something like that, and, how did you get the data, and then what are the kind of things that you found?
So I was looking at a range of surveys, range of data, and many of them triggered by conversations, right? I spoke to people who have dated in Delhi, Bombay, Pune, other cities, and they've dated in Bangalore. And they themselves are telling me things that is triggering my thoughts. Like this guy who I sort of interviewed, young guy, and he was a Muslim. So I asked him, have you dated, how many cities have you dated in? And he spoke about Delhi, Bombay, Pune, and Bangalore. And then he told me about different experiences in different cities. Bola, Bombay mein to I could never go to the person's house or never get her to my home, because simply where is the privacy, right? It emerged from that. And virtually everything in terms of, then I began to look for data to support it. It was a reportage which bubbled up trends I should be looking for. And I think most best stories are done by that you are spotting trends through reportage, and then you want to go confirm with the data if there is data to support it. And then I tried looking for data in different places, whatever I could, to support my narrative, because otherwise just reporting and you can't base it. So that was one. One of the most fascinating things, Amit, that I want to talk about is how much trust matters in the matter of heart. And the journey from connecting on the app to the meeting at home and the bedroom, right, physical, felt like the shortest in Bangalore. And that kept repeating itself, like different people, different places, and they're telling me the same thing. In Delhi, so many people told me, girls as well as boys, and boys were frustrated, girls were scared, and hence they were telling me that we would do in-app conversations. So they would not share their number within the dating app. They would talk because they were concerned about safety. They were concerned about the other person. The trust was totally missing. And hence many times over 3 months they have chatted within app, and that real interaction in either real world or even on WhatsApp, etc., didn't happen. And that told you how much the trust mattered in this world. Then in Bombay, the real estate and the privacy concerns, right, that definitely played a very, very big role. Bombay is a very cosmopolitan city, safe city, trust, all that is there. But real estate meant that there was no place to go to, right? And young people need the privacy, right? In Pune and other cities, I think the conservative approach, like I remember talking to this guy who was in his 30s, and he said, in the dating world, I was a dinosaur. As a single man, I was a dinosaur. In the sense, everybody was in their early 20s and stuff. 30 wale to sabki shaadi ho chuki hai. So in this city, the pool is much bigger for him. And here, what I heard was that connecting instantly almost on the WhatsApp, right? The trust factor was pretty high. And meeting at home was very easy and very quick. The journey from app to meeting in person was the shortest in this city, and trust had a very, very important role to play. This for me was really something that was very, very interesting and stood out. I hadn't looked at it. The other thing that stood out is how the money behaves in different cities. And this insight sort of was given by Deepak Shinoy, okay? And then, of course, other people sort of spoke about it, because once he triggered that, I started talking to people to understand it, and how the money behaves in Delhi versus Bombay versus Hyderabad versus Chennai versus Bangalore. That itself is a fascinating sort of a story about how the culture shapes what color the money and how it behaves, right? That was also very, very interesting and important. You want me to talk about that?
Yes, please elaborate.
Okay. So, in Delhi, money has color, black and white, right? And it's a cash transaction dominates. A lot of money is the trading money, the business money, the power structures right now, and whichever you can talk about politics and bureaucracy and all that. That meant that money behaved in very different way. There was a black transaction, there was a white transaction that shaped how people looked at money. And then, of course, brand, status, all that kind of where money got, real estate, right? That's where the money got spent. Bombay is about dhanda, the stock market dhanda, and how much interest the money earns. There is no, or very little, or not as much concept about the equity capital, right? Risk capital, right? Hyderabad, and this, again, it was corroborated by a lot of people. So it's not one person, but if one person is saying it, I went, and I'll tell you how this somebody else told me another story to corroborate some of these things. In Hyderabad, are you a Reddy or are you this? That built a certain network, and if you didn't belong there, a lot of things became very difficult for you. In Chennai, it was the family businesses, right, which had money. And often family finances and how the capital gets deployed is you have 10 family members, and all of them have to align, even for as little as 25 crore, 100 crore. Will have to have the alignment of everybody to be able to push that deal through. In Bangalore, it's a first generation entrepreneur. Nandan Nilekani's money is his money. Prashant Prakash's money is his money, right? And they have a lot of leverage and control over how that money, how he deploys his money, how he behaves his money. And they also understand risk capital, right? So there's a lot of flexibility and agility to that money and that risk capital, right? The way they can, and they also understand risk capital because they are part of venture world in many ways, and that shapes a lot of how the risk sort of people here are able to take with their money. So that is one part. I'll give you one example that I heard from somebody else. So this was an entrepreneur sitting in Hyderabad. I was trying to understand ये जो I'm hearing about Hyderabad or other cities, so that I've done for other cities as well, but I'll specifically pick out Hyderabad. So he was in Hyderabad and he was trying to raise money, right? And he announced on Twitter that he's coming to Bangalore and he would love to meet. Multiple people reached out. I forget now somebody in the venture world. He also said, okay, I'll catch up with you. And he met. He got it first round of funding like that on one meeting. He said, Hyderabad mein kabhi nahi hota. Okay. Multiple filters would have gone to make that happen. So I think that also sort of should have played so this is how money behaves, the color of money, all that is interesting about different cities.
To go back to your sort of insights onto dating from the Tinder data, like I was particularly struck by that one data point, that the journey from first making contact on the app to actually visiting someone's house in Delhi can be like up to 6 months, I think you said, and because of the trust factor in Mumbai it can be a few weeks, in Bangalore it can be a few days, and that would seem that the dating scene is vibrant in Bangalore and is good for single people, but a couple of sort of one, you've had a lot of people telling you in the book about how it's, you have the choice, but you're bewildered by the choice and you don't know what to do with it. Like a former guest on the show, Samarth Bansal, had once written this beautiful essay on dating where he had said, quote, for men, dating is like dying of thirst in the desert, not a drop of water in sight. For women, it's like dying of thirst in the ocean. Water is everywhere, but it's mostly toxic and full of salt, right? So just because you have this sort of, like on one hand, the data might seem to indicate that, hey, it's good here, but on the other hand, you have a lot of quotes from people in your book who tell you it's not quite that way. And another interesting data point in your book, which really struck me and had me thinking, was about how Bangalore is almost becoming the pet capital of India, that more and more people are buying pets, and and that also signals to me that there is, is it out of loneliness? I think you mentioned oxytocin may play a part, and you just want to go back in the evening and hug something. It's just that process of having someone to take care of, etc., etc. So what is sort of your sense with what's happening with the lives of young people in the city? Because in my mind's eye, the way that I see it is that it's not that, I mean, Bangalore is a part of India, but it's evolving. Like Bangalore's today is India's tomorrow, in a sense. It's going to go to the other cities. We're going to become more and more globalized, etc., etc. So what are the lives of young people like, especially young people looking for love? What is your sense in all this territory?
So absolutely bang on, Amit, that while it seems they've got plenty, but it's also that dating platforms have corrupted or maybe made things difficult for young people. While finding sex, one night hookups, has become so much easy. Finding love, a deep, long-term relationship has become difficult. And it's not just in the dating world, but what you realize in this city is that the volatility of life and work hits you in so many ways, right? And I was working out of a co-working hub, right? And there were startups all around me. And I saw that there were days that they were on cloud 9, funding aa gaya, ye wo. Then I saw the startup winter happen, the layoffs happened, and then the closures happened. Everybody was let go. There was a time that it was such a boom time that everybody was like having a great time. And this volatile life strikes you. It is far more volatile than I have experienced in any other city. Maybe stock market has its gyrations, but I think this city, you experience it so much more powerful and strong peaks and troughs that they shape life a lot, both its highs and lows. And that volatility, so this is a professional life which is itself is volatile, like startup world is cyclical, right? And ditto is happening in the personal life. Remember, many of these people are away from the parents. And they are probably here with their peer group, with their friends. They're staying with their friends, whatever, right? So that. Now friendships are fickle. Dates or girlfriends or boyfriends, right? The romantic relationships too, thanks to the dating world, right? It's also very volatile. Finding long-term, lasting relationships is very difficult. And in the book, somewhere, sort of this girl tells me, and many people have told me, but particularly I point out to this girl. She says, she's got 2 people here she's kind of dating on a regular basis, but she's got like so many people staring at you from the dating platforms, right? You don't know. But you've gotten so used to moving from one thing to another that you don't know how to stay on one relationship. And I think it's a problem that dating, not just about Bangalore, but today's young are grappling with. That dating platforms have opened up so much challenges. They have made things easy, which is easy to hook up or find sex. But it's made it so hard to find deep friendships, deep relationships, long lasting. And because you have just the next relationship, just another swipe right away, that the patience threshold to stick through a downturn in a relation, and all relationships are built through downturns, not when everything is a honeymoon period, right? That patient threshold goes away or goes down, and you just move from one thing to another. And I've seen this cycle play out, particularly in the early 2020s, right? These people are having sort of go time, right? But by late 20s, when the joy of hookups and sex, etc., has kind of feels jaded, they want to look for meaningful relationships. And it feels hard. And I've had some of these very candid conversations with people, and they are desperately looking for those. And remember that many times the traditional family arranged marriages that one thinks about, right? Many of those options are not a possibility anymore because either their ties to the family or that conventional caste system or whatever is gone. And they are grappling. So many of them are grappling what to do, how to settle down, how to find a match for themselves. But what I also interestingly know is that many of them, after years of dating experiences, many of them living in some deep long-term relationship, have suddenly gotten into an arranged marriage. And I myself know 2-3 people like that.
Wow.
And that sort of confounds me, right? That with so much experience in the dating world and they rediscovering the strength of and the importance of arranged marriage, right? They have different people have different rationale why they've gotten into it, but I know so many examples that I would love to find out what the other two are thinking, the two of them. And many of them have lived in together for a very long time. And this has come as a surprise to one of the partners. Overnight sprung up like 2 months before his wedding or like something like that, or her wedding. This has happened. This surprise has come to them. So I don't know. I still don't have answers. But what I do see is, and I've had multiple conversations with therapists. They give you another dimension of perspective, what's going on inside those relationships, to be able to triangulate things that you are picking up. And what men seek in those therapies is so different than what women seek in those therapies. I mean, that's so interesting.
Elaborate.
Why they come to... So women is often about... okay, let me jog my memory. What it is, it's there in the book and I'm just trying to remember. We'll come to this question in a bit, right? But the reason women and men come to them is very different. And it tells you a fascinating story about how different genders look at themselves and the problems they are grappling with. But what I also constantly heard is that they saw a big change in women and their worldview and their expectations from themselves, which was not the case with men. Right? And that is creating so much dissonance between the two. But also, there is a generational shift that is beginning to happen, where relationship So at one point of time, there was hierarchy in the relationship, right? The man in the relationship had certain position and women had certain position. Today, women have become more vocal about what they want, about their career, about things that they want to do in their career. And they have certain demands and desires in the bed and outside of it, at work and outside of it. They are not shy of expressing them at all. And they are not even shy of taking decisions, right? Either walking out of marriage, etc. That's a big shift that they see. Many things, at least women of our generation, never could think about. What I heard from this therapist is, like questions around having children or not. It happens even before they are getting married. So those are very powerful, important conversations that these young women are beginning to have. Many of them are very clear that they don't want children, and they will have that conversation right there. And I remember at least one guy sort of mentioned to me that his relationship, they broke up because the woman was very clear that she didn't want a child. And he was clear that he wanted a child. So they broke up their relationship. So something that I heard in the Western context in the past, I'm beginning to hear with the younger women here. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but the fact that some of these women are expressing their point of view and they have the courage and the confidence to express themselves is a good change to notice. What I also noticed in the startup couple this thing, deliberately I chose couples from different age brackets, but because I wanted to see a generational shift if any of that is beginning to happen. And it was interesting because while older couples had very conventional sort of stereotypical roles in the house, a whole lot of them, not all of them, but a whole lot of them, the conventional idea about a family which is having children and stuff. The younger ones, some of them where I was delighted to meet them as a woman, because many times I noticed the role reversal where woman was the prime economic provider, the roles had reversed at home. And I don't know if it's a broader trend or not, but I definitely found these younger women far more assertive about what they want, how they want. There is a chase in their life outside of marriage that they are very clear about. And men are also stepping up as a partner. Even if it's a small change, even if it's a small minority, sliver of change, I would be happy to see that sliver of change happen right around us. So I did notice some of that. And I felt good about it. And I did see that generational evolution of some of these dynamics play out.
So I have a question for you, but before that, a sort of a quote. Like one of the people on Twitter I most enjoy reading, in fact, hers is the only Substack I have ever paid for. I like it so much. Is this lady, I don't know whether she's in the UK or the US, I forget now. She's called Ayla. I'll link her from the show notes. She is both incredibly good at data, a fantastic researcher, and a sex worker. So she regularly writes about sex and men's and women's attitudes towards sex. And I'll send you her stuff because I think you will absolutely love it. And there is a great tweet by her which is very thought-provoking for me. And mind you, she's using the word slut not in a bad way, but in a descriptive way. And she says, all the dudes I know with high body counts tend to be mostly banging women who have high body counts. It's less, quote, preying on wholesome virginal women, stop quote, and more, quote, all the sluts are in a giant slut cloud fucking each other, stop quote. And that phrase slut cloud is so great. And when I read your book and that chapter that you've written, I got to thinking about whether there are already two particular subsets of people. And one subset of people is people who are using these dating apps regularly and hooking up and etc., the quote-unquote slut cloud as she calls it. And the other set of people which isn't, which is perhaps not using these dating apps, doesn't want to be promiscuous, and therefore doesn't have that sort of problem of too much choice and not finding friendships. And not finding friendships and deep relationships is difficult anyway at any times. I guess that's a difficulty that endures. But my question really is that what percentage of the young people do you think you are on Tinder in the first place? Because while the Tinder data tells you something stark about Bangalore, it would suffer from the selection bias of being only about those people who are on Tinder. And the rest could have been could have a different outlook towards life, which is perhaps more quote unquote old fashioned or whatever. And what you said about a lot of people who are on that Tinder game going in for arranged marriages actually doesn't surprise me. Simply because I would imagine that if the texture of your meeting people is from shallow interaction to shallow interaction, then eventually at some point you lose the ability to be able to connect deeply, and you crave it so much that you're like, fuck it, I'm not going to hold out for that. I'm getting the arranged marriage and I'll just commit to that. So at some level that also makes sense to me. But what are your thoughts?
So one is that, yes, in this city, digital platforms, including dating platforms, have very high penetration level, right? Very, very high. I don't think I've met anybody who's not been on any of these dating platforms. Some dating platforms, in fact, they've tried a whole lot of them. In fact, not just here, in other cities as well, Delhi, Bombay, and I especially speak of large cities. And my son is 24, and his peer group and etc. I'm aware that they are on dating platforms. That has become the prime way of exploring relationships. That's one. Now, second thing is, I think it's a matter of hormone that when you're early 20s. You want to experiment with things. Sex is important at that point of time, and you want to experience the rush and all that, right? But I think at some point of time, and one, mind you, it's not just about men. I want to clarify, it's equally women, and it's a good thing, right? That I think there's no gender gap from men wanting sex and women not wanting sex. And this is especially in this city that I know of. I can't speak of other cities, but that is an important aspect of the relationship, especially in your early 20s when you're discovering sex, discovering physicality of it. But overwhelmingly, I've heard from so many that the joy of the physical sort of physicality of the relationship begins to wane as they kind of reach their late 20s. And I'm sure there would be a minority, or there would be quite a few who will still continue to enjoy just the shallow physical sort of level of the relationship. But for a vast majority, at least I interacted with, did talk about the missing friendships, missing deeper level conversations in the relationship. I saw that even if they indulge in casual sex, shallow relationship, and even if I have spoken to just 40, right? I mean, I remember talking to this one person who was in his early 30s, and I was talking to him about his dating journey, and then he was getting married to his longtime girlfriend, and I was asking him, and he was saying, all around me, and in his early 30s, I've seen people with broken hearts, right? And they don't have answers to. मतलब they are just so hollow in their own life कि मतलब उनको लग रहा है कि एक relationship चाहिए मुझे जो depth हो, जो हो. But उन्हें नहीं समझ में आ रहा है कि dating platform is not giving them the answers. The construct of the platform is such that it encourages moving from one partner to another. So he said, all around me, I see these people who are so broken, who want to get into deep relationship, but they don't know how. So that is what probably I would say to answer what you are saying. I don't think it's just a men and women thing. I think the chase for physical sort of relationship is equally, I saw amongst women as much as men in the early years. But I also saw a sort of curve, right? That from a peak of early 20s to now feeling jaded and wanting deeper level relationship begins to set in the late 20s. Minority will always be there who will still be engaging in it, but that's the broader curve. And yes, in this city, because digital penetration is so high that I don't think it's a bubble that I'm looking at. I won't say that.
Another question I have, which kind of comes out of data, and is great data is probably already out of date, but I'll quote it anyway because it's so impressive, where at one point you say, home to 33% of India's frontier tech talent, according to the Karnataka Digital Economy Mission. Bengaluru has over 1 lakh PhDs, over 2.5 lakh data scientists, 3 lakh chip designers and testers, over 31,000 AI talent, over 30,000 automotive software engineers, and over 15,000 aeronautical engineers. Stop quote, and you go on and you give more figures, and I'm sure they're even more impressive now. But You also described how, there can be swings where one day things are going well, you're optimistic, the other time you're not. And there is, I think, a fundamental threat to the entire industry, in the sense that a lot of the industry, and this has changed a little bit, but certainly in the aughties and definitely the 90s, it was true. A lot of it was low-level workers doing IT outsourcing. You had, your population was mainly code coolies. Now, obviously, in the last 10 years, there's kind of change. You've got many more startups. You've got a lot more sophistication. There are a lot of different roles there. But what's going to happen with AI eventually is going to put code coolies out of a job. AI will be a tremendous tool for higher order thinkers who can, dream big and build bigger. And for them, it's mind blowing. But as far as a code coolie population is concerned, unless you can shift yourself to becoming a higher order thinker, to think above the API, as it were, as the phrase goes, you could kind of be screwed. And that appears, to what extent do you think that is a threat over here?
So let me just unpack a little on the talent landscape in the city. While startup world is the sexiest part of the talent landscape, let me also mention that IT outsourcing is the core. IT outsourcing services industry, right? Which is not the sexy part, which is the labor cost arbitrage once upon a time. And that is the biggest core of the tech industry. The other part that you mentioned, which is the PhD, etc., the city has plenty of research, right? From HAL to ISRO to IISc to many other labs, right? They are a very different world from CCamp, etc. And they work in a very different environment. In fact, if I had time, I would have loved to uncover and talk a bit about that. The way the drivers, the work environment, the salary, everything is so different in these government labs. Work in such a distinct and different environment than, say, a Microsoft R&D center, right? Or a Google R&D center. And which is so different than IT services outsourcing, right? Where you clock in, clock out, you have hazard restrictions and all that. As compared to startup, which is very different, chaotic, volatile. And when I speak of volatility, which is the sharpest in startup, right? Where you go up and go down. And then on that scale of volatility, different parts of, for example, at government labs, there is not that much volatility, but their challenges are very different. So one and all this set of talent is sitting in one city is what the talent density is about. I mean, you wouldn't think that auto experts will sit here. Auto Hub is not here. It's Tamil Nadu, right? Or it's NCR, which is where Marutis of the world sit, or Gujarat. But why auto talent? Because Mercedes, Volkswagen, GM, Ford, all these people, and I don't know GM, Ford, but almost all auto companies in the world have their R&D center here, right? And increasingly the software that goes into the car is getting bigger and bigger in its value sort of contribution. So, and these are auto specialists, right? I forget now, it was Stanford or Harvard, they put together a report, a global report talking about AI talent density, and they put Bangalore at the top, okay, which is AI. And there was some specific term that they used, translational, I forget now, I'm forgetting, but on some parameter, they put Bangalore on top. So that volatility is there, but you have to look at the graded scale. Some areas are extremely volatile, some areas are not. And startup lay at the top, but they are also the most aspirational jobs. Second is that AI and the sort of transformation or disruption it is bringing in. It is bringing in. You can already see in the number of hires that IT outsourcing is doing. It's dramatically come down, and it's a reflection of that. They are also preparing for it because a lot of jobs might get disintermediated. I remember one of the last conversations I had with Kunal Shah of Cred, and we were talking, and I asked him about AI and its impact, and he spoke about the earth beneath the feet for our startup world. Tech industry is shifting, and we don't know what will happen. So we have no idea what will happen, but what we don't know is disruption is underway. Abhi kya hoega pata nahi. So I think It is true. I've seen where I work that so many, and I know so many other people that their startup became irrelevant overnight because of AI, and they shut down. The business model was flawed. I think different parts of the tech ecosystem here will feel it in different way. IT outsourcing will have to completely reimagine how they construct their business model and deliver value to the clients. What is big that is happening across India and including in Bangalore is the GCC, as they call it, Global Capability Center, or MNC R&D centers. I think this year or next year or last year, GCCs outpaced IT outsourcing industry in new hires. And that's telling you that MNC R&D centers are at an inflection point where more and more are getting hired. And this will happen in multiple spaces, multiple industry. For example, Mercedes is a prime example. I was talking to Manu, who heads R&D center here. He was saying that money for long, nobody bothered. We were doing like little, small, cheerful work. But today, we are shaping a lot of things that Mercedes does globally. We have become very, very critical to what Mercedes experience is globally, the software experience, right? And that is playing out in multiple sectors, defense, auto, all the hardware sector that you can think about is getting disrupted with software as the variable, right? And a lot of that is beginning to happen. So GCC is a big story that is emerging. GCC's Hyderabad is a big player there, right? And there are, it's with this good infrastructure, everything, Hyderabad is getting a lot of investment, increasingly so. And Bangalore is also getting, but that's a competition that two cities are competing. But all competition is good, right? I mean, it keeps cities on the edge and to try and compete. Have I answered your question?
Yes. You have, and more. Here's my penultimate question. I've taken a lot of your time today, so a couple of final questions. And my penultimate question is this, that you've spoken of Bangalore's hardware and software as being 2G and 5G respectively, right? And a lot of the beautiful things that are part of that culture which create this virtuous cycle have come down through decades and centuries and all of that. But the urban governance is very much, a 1947 independent India construct thing. It's absolutely horrible. It's creaking at the bones. All my friends in Bangalore keep complaining about the traffic. I will now point them to your data about automobiles and say, why are you buying so many cars and you scoundrels?
There's no public transport. No.
That too, yeah.
How will they manage?
How will they manage? So my question is that, and this is a dichotomy you point to right at the start of this book, right? Where you talk about on the one hand, it's Bangalore shining, as it were. And on the other hand, there's a creaking public infrastructure, the potholes, no public transport, everything's kind of going to hell. How far do you think that can continue? Because beyond the point, then it begins to creak at the joints if urban infrastructure isn't fixed. In the last chapter of your book, you also talk about how, whatever civic activism there is, it's working in silos. It's not really talking to each other. I've done episodes with Ashwin Mahesh, who's a good friend of mine, who does a lot of those things within Bangalore. And my complaint to him always is that, look, I love the work you guys are doing. But the point is that what you are doing is filling in the gaps for what government should be doing anyway. How do you build those systems so there's accountability within the system and, civic action isn't even needed? So what is your sense of this? Now that you're also a Bangalore resident and you're a Bangalorean, as it were. So what is your sense of this? Like, does something have to give at some point, or will governance get better and improve? How does it work?
So one, just talking a bit about the problem before we talk about this, that one of the things I noticed here, that look at Delhi and Bombay. Historically, they come with an enormous heritage, right? They have been big cities or capital cities or in some way top cities of India since independence. And those have advantages, right? Government thinks of projects, it comes to Delhi naturally. Till early 2000, Bangalore was nowhere. It was really 10th, 12th, 14th in the pecking order. Now, over the last 20 years, the city has shifted massive gears. And on tax, on jobs, on deposits, on more than anything, India's innovation capital, right? A lot of things that has happened in modern India in terms of science, etc., from Aadhaar to UPI to whatever you can think about has emerged. ISRO, HAL, all that here, right? I think there isn't enough recognition at a national level the importance of the city, right? Simply because of the legacy of the past. While the city has changed so much and grown so much and contributed, I think for many people at the center or at other levels, right, realizing the what is coming to the kitty, right? All kinds of kitty. Second is, I think, while Delhi is a city-state, it has its advantages. It is the capital city also. So it's a pampered city, right? वहाँ पे कुछ pollution का problem होता है, Supreme Court सीधा. Nothing else, right? Who cares? Here, lakes are frothing. It's a back of the beyond in some ways, right? So headlines, it doesn't make headlines except when the traffic congestion, gridlock traffic or something happens like that. So one, the recognition, it doesn't get the priority. Third is that also the city, it's a state. Bangalore is small. And so the government has to pay attention, and electoral politics does shape a lot of things that happens in this city. And all that manifests in how the city is. In terms of city infrastructure, in fact, one of the data that, as part of data report that we are doing, I'm pushing our partners to look at the kind of infrastructure investment that is happening in other cities and quantum it is happening here. And it will be a fraction in terms of the growth that the city is seeing in terms of new jobs and young people flocking to the city and the commensurate investment in infrastructure. I'm 100% sure there will be huge lag. So politics, corruption, all that. Now coming to, will there be an inflection point? I hope so. I think at some point of time, and I remember Manish Sabharwal and we were talking about this, and Manish of Team Lease, and he said that, the city is still at a growth phase. Abhi bhi growth chal raha hai. And growth momentum velocity is pretty high. The data of census should tell us the growth and momentum and all that. I think there will come a time when the growth will have to slow down. And the velocity will have to come down. And then I think at some point of time, something will give. Some inflection point will happen either at the center or at here where there will be recognition. Because our city governance administrative sort of mechanism is flawed. We all know, right? We don't have mayors. We don't have empowered mayors who have a budget, who can look after the city well-being. City are orphans from that point of view. And all our cities are. But look at Bombay. I mean, multiple projects have just coincided to fix the city's, at least the infrastructure issue. There are many problems, but at least they are fixing the infrastructure issue. So I'm going to be hopeful and optimism that I think at some point of time, political stakeholders at the center, at the state, will become aware of why they need to do this. And, a lot of things that India is going to do will be digital diplomacy, right? That we are talking about is happening here. Now, if you want to nurture that, you got to somehow sort of figure out a better way. Now, reservation for locals, these are political issues that are emerging. How the city and the state and the political stakeholders reconcile with this conflicting triggers that's shaping the narrative within the city will shape a lot of things, how the city trajectory evolves going forward. But I'm going to be hopeful here. But I'm a hopeful person, optimistic person on that.
No, but now you don't have any choice but to be optimistic because Bangalore will kick you out. You're in the city of optimism. You better stay optimistic.
Yes.
So my final question to you, I'm so grateful you've shared your time and insights with me today.
Totally my pleasure.
My final question is, for me and my listeners, recommend books, films, music which mean a lot to you and which you'd love to share with the world.
So I'm going to pick one or two films that have meant a lot to me and I still watch. And I'm not a great big movie watcher. The Pursuit of Happiness is a film that I always go back to. I think it's a powerful story and it's a good film to watch on a low day, right? And there would be multiple other films that I like some of the heroes and heroines. I like Shefali Shah a lot. I like Irfan Khan a lot. So some of their films I would watch blindfold. And amongst books, I like biographies a lot. I think they offer me fiction of real world in a way I would love to consume, and many biographies that I can think of, right from Catherine Graham's book. She was a Washington Post owner, right? Their owner family. Her biography and the imposter syndrome that you speak about. That was the first time I was exposed to that. To many other, Andrea Agassi and what went through making of him, Isaacson's Steve Jobs, and after that I've read Einstein and many others. I think biographies offer, otherwise when you read the headlines, you see slivers of some person, but an honestly done biography tells you so much about the complexity of the person. And if somebody can bring out the nuances and complexity and challenge and highs and lows of the person, I think it's a powerful, you don't have to go through it, but that's a huge exposure and learning that one experiences and witnesses another world in a real sense. It's not a fiction. In fiction, 2-3 of my authors, favorite author one is Alice Munro. I love her.
I love Alice Munro.
And I like Ishiguro, Kazuo Ishiguro. I like between Murakami and Ishiguro. I lean towards Ishiguro a lot. He's the way he captures nuances of relationships, feelings, unpacks layers in human emotions. It's very, very beautiful. When my son was growing up, I didn't read Roald Dahl when I was growing up. So I devoured Roald Dahl when he was growing up, and I would read to him, and I discovered Roald Dahl much late in life, but I loved him. But I read non-fiction a lot, also because it's relevant to my work as well. And one of the books that was an eye-opener is Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. I didn't know that, our brains would behave in such a way, and that was an interesting book. But I pick up, normally my non-fiction is related to my work. So when I was working on Bangalore, I virtually read all the books that came out. A book on slum on Bangalore, a book on this, a book on that, everything that I could, so that I understood the city. And it applies to others. Like when I'm doing something on social media, I picked up a book on social media. So it was related to that.
Well, thank you so much for these recommendations. I'm really inspired by your energy, and thanks so much. This was great.
Thanks, Amit. Lovely to have this conversation. I truly enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, head on over to your nearest bookstore, online or offline, and pick up Unboxing Bengaluru by Malini, Goyal and Prashant Prakash. Check out the show notes, enter rabbit holes at will. You can follow Malini on Twitter at Goyal Malini, one word, and you can follow me at Amit Varma, AMITVARMA. You can browse past episodes of The Seen and the Unseen at seenunseen.in and on any podcast app of your choice. Thank you for listening. Did you enjoy this episode of The Seen and the Unseen? If so, would you like to support the production of the show? You can go over to seenunseen.in/support and contribute any amount you like to keep this podcast alive and kicking. Thank you.